Chapter 842. Countless shrill screams exploded in their ears at the same time. The surroundings were pitch black, and they couldn't even see their own fingers. There were only some faint lights in the distance. It was as if they were in a desperate situation and couldn't extricate themselves. In the darkness, there was a weak light that lit up the surrounding open space. Faint blue sparks danced nonstop. It lit up a small area and made the surrounding souls even more ferocious and terrifying. No one present showed the slightest bit of panic. Their breathing was steady, and they were obviously not affected at all. He was holding a faint blue light. Walking in the incomparably dark abyss, they couldn't step on the ground and couldn't see the sky above. Everywhere was the same, as if there was only darkness everywhere. Other than that, there was nothing else. However, after walking forward for a short while, he stepped onto a seemingly wide road. They were stepping on solid ground. On both sides of the road, there were flowers and plants that emitted a faint blue light. They didn't have any other use, and could only emit a faint phosphorescence in the dark night. However, there was light everywhere. One step and the world changed. It seems that the dark Shinran has extraordinary means. Qin Yu said meaningfully. As they walked forward, they encountered something that looked like a city gate. On both sides were ferocious and terrifying abyssal creatures that didn't look like humans. Many of the gathering teams entered the city in an orderly manner. However, it was clear that their team was different. The captain's identity was slightly special. He knew Draconic. Just because of this, his status had soared. As long as they didn't know Draconic, they would more or less give him some face because he could communicate with the dragon god and understand the language of the dragon god. These two are friends of the dragon god. You must not offend them. Listen to my advice. You mean strength? What can that be used for? Real powerhouses like to hide their strength. This is called keeping a low profile. The Draconic that these two lords speak is exactly the same as the Shenron's accent. The dragon god is above. You should have let us in long ago, but I think the dragon god will still protect you. Although Qin Yu and the dragon soul didn't understand what they were saying, they could guess a thing or two from their expressions. After all, the difference in appearance was there. Anyone who was slightly vigilant would not let them in so easily. However, it was clear that this was not a problem. In the end, they still swaggered into the city. The inside looked more prosperous, although the sky was always dark. But here and there were different kinds of sparks for illumination. It wasn't as if there weren't any hawkers on the streets. However, the things they sold were rather strange. The dragon's soul curiously leaned over to take a look, but who knew that it would only see a few bones. There were still pieces of bloody flesh on it. There were also people who used all kinds of glowing stones to swindle people. There was no order here at all, but it was not messy at all. Everyone was doing their own things in an orderly manner. Even if they were cheating, they still had their own rules. No matter what they were doing, they all had one thing in common. That was to believe in the Lord Dragon God. The prestige of the Black Dragon God here reached its highest point. Perhaps faith was indeed useful. However, that also depended on where it was used. If it was used to strengthen oneself, then it would be a drop in the bucket. It was just like how the Black Dragon God wanted to collect power similar to life force. His crazy act of collecting faith was also unfathomable, because it could not be used for oneself at all, and it would even take a lot of effort. It would all be wasted. Could it be that he wants to become a true god? I heard that if you want to become a true god, you either have to go against the heavens or even suppress the heavens, or you have to follow the heavens and make yourself a part of the rules, and you have to use faith. The dragon soul could only guess at the big picture. However, there was still one point that was unclear. Why did the Black Dragon God want to collect power similar to life force? If faith was used to build a few bodies, then what about this life force? It could not be fused with the evil dragon at all. Qin Yu looked at the tallest building in the city. Perhaps he wants to save someone. However, Judging from the fact that it had never stopped moving, it could be seen that it had never stopped moving. If the Black Dragon God really wanted to use this huge amount of life force to save someone, the effect would definitely not be good. Otherwise, there was no need to keep accumulating it like this. According to the information they had so far, the Black Dragon God had been doing this for at least 10 years. Moreover, it was not only the ancient remote region that was invaded. They did not know how many places had a part of their life force faintly devoured. It could be seen from the previous act of summoning the Black Gate. If Qin Yu had not been there to control the situation, such a thing would have happened. That Black Gate would have devoured and plundered all the life force within 100 miles. Otherwise, it would definitely not have let it go so easily. Even all the abyssal creatures in the city should have been stored like this, as an existence that could be collected and squeezed at any time. Look at what they were saying. They were willing to give up everything they had. Everyone was like this. Everything they had, including their possessions and lives. The tallest building in the entire city was a lobby. It looked extremely empty, but it was densely covered with all kinds of cloth. They were colorful and flowery, but all of them had been washed clean. And in the middle, a huge shadow of the Dragon God stood. That pair of eyes seemed to be real, and they could be seen through the endless void, staring at you. Qin Yu suddenly felt as if he had been targeted by something. And for the current him, it was an extremely terrifying existence. But on second thought, the extremely terrifying pressure disappeared without a trace. Want to use pressure to intimidate all the people who came here. Perhaps if it were someone else, they would have been suppressed by this pressure. But unfortunately, I am not. Qin Yu thought for a while, but still did not find a piece of cloth to sit on, even if they were washed clean one by one. But when he thought about the appearance of those abyssal creatures, he was unwilling to touch these things again. It was just a statue, and the workmanship was relatively rough. At this time, the statue was empty, without the slightest fluctuation. This proved that the owner of the statue was still not here. When the owner of the statue returned, it should be when all the pieces of cloth were occupied. One could imagine what kind of grand scene it would be. The densely packed people, with the most devout attitude, respectfully welcomed the arrival of the legendary Dragon God. Just thinking about it seemed to be enough to make one's blood boil. Qin Yu looked at the statue and suddenly raised the corner of his mouth. Chapter 843. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, that's Qin Yu. Along with a loud bang, the huge Dragon God statue suddenly shattered. Huge rocks fell to the ground one after another. The Dragon God's eyes were still full of majesty, but had shattered into countless pieces. What happened? Lord Dragon God shattered. What nonsense are you talking about? How could Lord Dragon God? Oh my God, Lord Dragon God actually shattered. To be more precise, the statue of the Dragon God was shattered. But this statue often had all kinds of miracles. So many people regarded this statue as the Dragon God himself. When the Dragon God was here, no matter what kind of impact it received, there would not be a trace of it left behind. It would always be the same as when they first saw it. And now, the indestructible statue in their hearts suddenly shattered into pieces all over the ground. Everyone panicked. In this underground abyss city, all the abyssal creatures panicked. Was the Dragon God finally going to abandon them? Qin Yu and the Dragon Soul came and left quietly. In a short period of time, these abyssal creatures would not think of them at all. By the time they realized it, it would be too late. Everything would be too late. The statue had been destroyed, and they would leave. I don't know if this statue can still descend into the city and dominate everything if it shatters. Qin Yu left the city with the Dragon Soul. He had already memorized every detail on the way, and now it was not difficult to return the way he came. In a certain void, a pair of huge pupils gradually emerged in the darkness. All of a sudden, the chaos in Abyss City was reflected in the huge pupil. the black dragon god unwillingly let out a roar full of anger. But no matter what, he had no way to descend into Abyss City again. He did not know how long it would take for the abyssal creatures to react and build a suitable statue for him again. Everything that happened just now gradually emerged in the pupils, until he noticed who destroyed the statue. Unfamiliar ant, I will never let you go. It seemed that the void was also affected by this angry power. It kept trembling. A series of pitch-black cracks slowly appeared. The entire space began to tremble and shatter, but it gradually recovered under a mysterious and powerful force. It was a cycle that went back and forth, passing through a pitch-black road. Countless soul shadows appeared once again. However, compared to their previous frenzy, they seemed much calmer. All of them floated quietly, their eyes dull and lifeless. However, it was still rather shocking to see so many soul shadows gathered together. Heaven suppressing battle god formation. A huge array formation with unparalleled pressure appeared in the sky above the soul shadow. All marriages were suppressed. Under Qin Yu's control, a powerful suction force emerged from the array, devouring all the soul power within a radius of 50 kilometers. The huge array formation totem continued to grow, and the faintly discernible traces of the array formation became even more conspicuous. All of a sudden, an extremely powerful force erupted from the center of the formation. Mountains and rivers shattered, and the void trembled. Even the people at the periphery of the realm felt this extremely powerful impact, and they were instantly shocked. What the hell is down there? This powerful force actually made me feel fear, as if it could take my life in the blink of an eye. It seems that the space below might be connected to another space, and not the 10 Directions world. Which expert is it? Do you think it's possible that the person who released such a powerful force is one of the people who came in at the same time as us? The last sentence was laughed off by everyone. How was that possible? If there really was such an expert, who could it be? All the powerful people in the 10 Directions world were now gathered in one place. None of them were left out. If there was an expert who went in when they weren't paying attention, they would definitely be discovered. Then they would definitely discover it. After all, in the 10 Directions world, there wasn't a single one that they didn't know. The 9 great emperors' hearts were beating rapidly. A strong sense of uneasiness gradually spread. There was definitely someone who was extremely powerful, and he wasn't in this group of top experts. His identity, origin, and whereabouts were all a mystery. No one knew what kind of realm his strength had reached. And that person was Qin Yu. Look, isn't that Qin Yu? Why is he here? Whether it was the layers of incomparably realistic illusions, the sudden movements in this forbidden area, the ocean-like soul power, or the mysterious black fog, everything was so sudden, and it seemed to contain a huge secret. Therefore, almost everyone forgot about the main character this time. But since they were here, they had understood the relevant matters. Of course, they had also seen Qin Yu's portrait that had been completely spread everywhere. At this moment, when the real person appeared, he was recognized almost instantly. That face was incomparably clear. When he walked over step by step, everyone couldn't help but cast their gazes and stare at him attentively. Everyone was looking at him. Qin Yu's expression still didn't change. Step by step, he walked in front of everyone. Someone noticed that he appeared from the forbidden area, and currently, because of the danger inside, no one dared to go down. If they wanted to go down, they would more or less be injured. But now, Qin Yu suddenly walked out from inside. He didn't seem to be injured at all. In fact, he was 100 times more energetic than all of them. Today is the day of the 1-month deadline. I'm here to fulfill my promise. I don't know if you have the courage. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air one after another. The Heavenly Palace Realm. In just a month, he had reached the Heavenly Palace Realm from the early stage of the Heavenly Virtual Realm. Which genius in the world could improve his strength to such a level in a short period of time? Originally, they guessed that the extremely powerful force from before might have come from him. At this moment, they completely dispelled their thoughts. In a short period of time, he had suddenly broken through a full realm. From their point of view, that was naturally an impossible thing. Therefore, everyone concluded that he must have swallowed the forbidden medicine to be able to break through a realm in a short period of time. Everyone knew that although swallowing the forbidden medicine could improve one's strength in a short period of time, the side effects were also extremely powerful after improving one's strength in a short period of time. But it was in exchange for his own potential being ruthlessly squeezed out. Moreover, using such a method to forcefully improve one's strength should be inferior to one's true realm. Chapter 844. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Moreover, even after forcefully leveling up, Qin Yu was only in the Heavenly Palace realm. Everyone present was at least in the Heavenly Palace realm. Therefore, he didn't seem to be in much danger. One of them happened to be the patriarch of the Heaven Merging Trading Firm. When he saw Qin Yu, his thoughts started to run wild. Was it a senior immortal who attacked just now? This is the depths of the abyss. Does it lead to another space? Perhaps it has something to do with the ninefold godly realm. Although it was just a guess, he was almost 80% sure. Perhaps only someone in the ninefold godly realm could have such powerful strength. Unfortunately, he still guessed wrong. That extremely powerful energy did not come from anyone else. It came from none other than Qin Yu. However, there was still a price to pay for guessing wrong. The 9 great emperors didn't dare to reject Qin Yu in front of everyone. They could only look at each other and shamelessly attack him together. Other than that, they had prepared many other methods. However, none of them were suitable for the current situation. There were many people present who were in the same realm as them. If they used any tricks, they would be easily discovered. No one would do such a thing unless they were in a desperate situation. It was inevitable that they would attack together. Otherwise, all of them might lose their reputation. However, the other great emperors were dumbfounded. They had just judged that Qin Yu's strength might be weak when the 9 of them joined hands to attack him. They shamelessly attacked a junior who had just reached the Heavenly Palace realm. They might even have used up their potential to reach the Heavenly Palace realm. What kind of hatred did they have for them to attack together? Moreover, they were so shameless and shameless. Those who were familiar with them would try to persuade them. Even if there is a deep hatred, they can't be so ugly. You and I are great emperors, and he is only in the Heavenly Palace realm. How can we attack together? It's against the rules. No matter what, since we are great emperors, we should have the bearing of a great emperor. The few of them couldn't say anything. If they talked about their past, not many people would believe them. If they didn't, they would be saying that they were despicable people. Therefore, there was no way he could open his mouth. He could only swallow this loss silently. For a moment, the hatred in his heart grew. Until now, nothing had been revealed. They were still able to retain some face, but they had already been labeled as shameless by the public. One could imagine. What would they do if things developed further? At that time, it wouldn't be just a little bit of disdain. The wealth that he had accumulated over tens of thousands of years would all go up in smoke. Outsiders have no way of knowing what happened between us. In short, once this matter is settled, I will give everyone an explanation. We're respecting our opponents, so we decided to attack together. Otherwise, wouldn't it be even more unfair to fight one after another? These words sounded reasonable at first, but if one thought about it carefully, they would have a different meaning. Their strength was already very strong. If they joined forces, it would be bullying. Of course, it wasn't good to take turns to fight, but there wasn't much time left. Wouldn't it be better if they came one by one and left enough time to rest in between? Unlike now, they were charging forward in a frenzy, completely not wanting to give the other party a way out. Everyone present was quite clear about this. Some of the people who thought they were smart remained silent. This matter was beyond their control. The great emperors didn't know what to say. Speaking of which, this was their own matter. Even if they were shameless, they couldn't offend several experienced great emperors in public. Only those who were familiar with Qin you couldn't help but worry. Qin you had already expected this. The more exquisite the dance, the more powerful these people felt. Of course, they wouldn't easily care about the life and death of others. Watching from the sidelines was a choice that all of them would make. It was also the most common and wise choice. Since you've already decided, then come at me together. Let me see your strength. Are you stronger than 10 days ago? Only a few of the people involved knew what had happened 10 days ago. They attacked at the same time and even used such a despicable method, like an ambush. However, in the end there was still no effect. They even let him slip away under their noses. At that time, they almost dug 3 feet into the ground, but in the end they still couldn't find him. In the end, they had to follow the crowd to see Qin Yu again. Ever since they attacked at the same time, the location that was reported every hour disappeared. It was only then that they realized that the previous positioning was just to lure them into action. All of them had been toyed with from head to toe. However, even if they had countless grievances in their hearts, they had no one to complain to. After all, who would believe them? One of the 9 great emperors waved his hand and set up a boundary that isolated all sound. Don't be arrogant here. So what if your strength is close now? The few of us attacked at the same time. You can't be arrogant here. Qin Yu, it's no longer your era. Qin Yu looked at their righteous faces and couldn't help but laugh out loud. All of them were sanctimonious hypocrites. He wouldn't mention all the dirty things that they did in private. If he casually brought out 1 or 2, it would be enough to make people sick. However, he just wanted to fight fair and square. He wanted to use these people to train himself. If not, it would be easy to destroy their reputation and everything that they had worked for so many years, because they had done too many things over the years. All of them were good at finding faults. As long as they pulled out a small thread, they could pull out a lot of things. I don't need to give examples to explain those things. I also have no intention of completely exposing your true colors. If you want to shut my mouth, then show me your strength. Only by defeating me can I keep you safe and sound for the time being and still live your lives freely and happily. Qin Yu expected them to show their full strength. If they didn't show their full strength, then how could he improve again in battle? Although he had already beaten all of these people in the illusion created by the graduate school for him. Everyone was killed by him over and over again, but there was still a difference between a real person and an illusion. No matter how realistic the illusion was, it couldn't accurately simulate everyone's every move. For example, the previous illusion didn't completely replicate the sanctimonious appearance of these people. There was a translucent cover between them. Chapter 845. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The people outside couldn't hear what was said inside. They could only see their facial expressions. They could roughly judge the situation between them. Other than that, they couldn't do anything else. Some people were watching, while some hoped that Qin Yu would win. However, most of the people were the former, and the latter was rare. I know Floating Light's character very well. Not only is he extremely powerful, but most importantly, his heart is extremely pure and kind. I've heard that Luan Emperor's strength has already reached the peak, but I don't know why he hasn't gone to the higher realm of the gods. Hey look, aren't these people much stronger than they were a few decades ago? Looks like they haven't been slacking. Although their strength has already reached the peak, they are still working very hard. However, it wasn't as easy as it was outside. Almost everyone thought that the few powerful people would definitely win if they worked together. However, in reality, they were facing a lot of pressure. Even though they didn't have any intention of retreating, they even looked like they had the upper hand. However, the people involved were very clear. They had already unleashed their strength to the extreme. Qin Yu, on the other hand, seemed to be at ease from the beginning to the end. Moreover, he focused on dodging. He didn't unleash his strongest strength from the beginning to the end. In other words, he didn't even fight back. However, even if he didn't fight back, they had already unleashed their strongest strength, and it was ineffective. This was what shocked them the most, and also what they couldn't accept. It's only been 10 days. It's only been 10 days. You are indeed a monster. If we don't get rid of you, we won't have peace from now on. Do you still remember what we practiced before? The few of them suddenly landed in different positions. 9 people. 9 people. A completely different light appeared on each of them. Dazzling golden light, gloomy green, clear azure blue, scorching fiery red, and honest deep brown. Other than the most basic 5 elements in this world. The others also tried their best to unleash their strongest strength. Wind blades appeared in other directions as well. Lightning, white light. It was even a deep darkness. The 9 basic elements in this world were all gathered. A thin layer of soundproof barrier couldn't withstand the impact of the power at all. It shattered soundlessly, emitting a crisp sound. Along with this layer of translucent enchantment that blocked out all sound, it disappeared. The rumbling sound caused everyone to take a few steps back. There were even people who couldn't bear to look at such a powerful attack. No one present was able to stop him. Moreover, the target of such a powerful attack was not an extremely powerful great emperor. He was in the Heaven Palace realm. No one thought that he had any chance of survival. All the light gathered to form a huge array, and then countless powers fused together. A power that could shake the heavens appeared out of nowhere. He rushed toward Chinyu with an unstoppable momentum. Everyone closed their eyes. However, the expected loud buzzing sound did not appear. The necessary time passed. A long time passed in the time it took to turn around. However, there was still no sound. This continued until someone was the first to open their eyes. However, they saw an inconceivable scene. He's not dead. Not only was he not dead, he was also completely fine. He seemed to be brimming with energy, as if he had not been affected in the slightest. Nothing has happened to Chinyu. Instead, those several people have been drained of all their energy. Their complexions are pale. In the sky, there was a faintly discernible gray light. They formed a huge, profound diagram. It flickered with a faint light. Just now, it was this array formation that looked extremely fragile. It blocked their combined attacks. Such a powerful force hit the political and legal system, but it did not even stir up the slightest ripple. In fact, the array was not completely undamaged after blocking such a powerful attack. However, it had swallowed too much soul power before, so there was only excess. The moment it was damaged, it was replenished in the blink of an eye. Therefore, it looked like it did not suffer any damage at all, and it easily blocked such a powerful attack. However, no matter what it was that allowed it to survive unscathed, it was enough to shock everyone and make them tongue-tied. You walked in front of them step by step. The array that was originally lying in the sky also merged into the ground with lightning speed. Puff, cough, cough. They were more or less severely injured again. When the array merged into the ground, everyone standing within the range of the array felt the powerful pressure. It was as if an immortal had descended. Even the great emperor could not resist. Under the powerful suppression, except for Yu's dragon soul, no one could stand. The other great emperors were just standing not far away and watching the show calmly. However, after the powerful suppression spread over, they could not hold back their expressions. They could not help but want to retreat, but it was already too late. One by one, they were suppressed on the ground in a sorry state. They could not move no matter how hard they tried. Instead, they made themselves look miserable. The truly smart people had long given up struggling. They chose to sit on the ground without moving. At least they did not look so miserable. And those who were still struggling were all in a sorry state. They were a joke for no reason. I'm sorry to have affected you guys. However, I just increased the power of this array, so I couldn't control it. I can't take back all the power in a short time, so I'll have to trouble you guys a little more. If I offended you, don't take it to heart. The dozen or so great emperors who were suppressed could not say a word, even if their hearts were hurting. They were so angry that their bodies were trembling. However, they could not say a word of no. At the moment, they needed to be wary of Chinyu, and he did have the strength to be arrogant. He had the capital to be confident. What could they do? They could only sigh helplessly. They still underestimated him. They could only blame themselves for not being able to dodge in time. Later on, all the great emperors who were affected outside, all of them learned to be smart. They sat on the ground without moving and guarded their own territory. At least they did not look as miserable as they did at the beginning. However, in the process of being suppressed, it was already very difficult for them to even move a finger. It was even more difficult to strike a pose, not to mention tidying up and cleaning up the messy marks on their bodies. Therefore, even if he regretted it now, there was no way he could clean up after himself. Chinyu then turned his gaze to his several enemies. For a moment, just now, he did feel the power that could almost destroy him. Chapter 846. It had to be said that in order to defeat him, these people had put in a lot of effort and thought of all sorts of methods. Unfortunately, they still failed in the end. All of their plans were ruined. The 9 of them were still unwilling to give up and continued to struggle. Moreover, all of them were extremely powerful. They really succeeded in resisting, but all they could do was move their arms and legs. Other than that, they couldn't do anything else. Aha! Emperor Floating Light used all of his strength to raise one of his arms. However, there was a cracking sound. His arm fell limply to the ground. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't use any strength. It was obviously fractured. You overestimate yourself. Now, I'll remind you one last time. Don't move, or you'll have to bear the consequences. Dragon's Soul. The dragon's soul rubbed its fists and was eager to fight. It walked over step by step. It slapped Floating Light's face hard. One could see with the naked eye that his face had already swelled up. One side of his face was completely red and swollen. Even the corner of his mouth was bleeding. It looked extremely terrifying. Suddenly, a sharp light flashed. The time around the dragon soul suddenly changed. That small hidden weapon was approaching at the slowest speed. The dragon's soul easily caught the small hidden weapon with its finger, and then suddenly threw it back. This time, the speed of the hidden weapon was changed. It had increased the flow of time by almost 60 to 70 times. The speed was extraordinarily fast, even though he didn't use much strength when he threw it out. However, with the acceleration of time by almost 60 to 70 times, it was still too fast for the naked eye to catch. Lin Feng's face was ashen. Originally, he did want to take the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Moreover, he had already taken out his trump card, although it was just a small piece. Its material was extremely precious. He had spent over 100 years to create this small piece of hidden weapon. All this time, no one had seen it before. Only he knew that there was such a trump card in this world. But now, the treasures that he had been hiding in the depths of his chest were useless. Even such a powerful treasure that no one knew about was unable to protect him. How dare you plot against me? Master, how should I deal with this person? Qin Yu glanced at him. You can do whatever you want with him. It doesn't matter if he dies. Suddenly, with a wave of his hand, other than Lin Feng, everyone else could no longer feel the enormous pressure. Lin Feng's eyes widened. He was in disbelief. Originally, he really thought that Qin Yu would not be able to control such a huge array formation. But now he was shocked by his control over such a powerful formation. Logically speaking, it should be impossible, because his strength was not enough. However, Qin Yu could not be judged by common sense. He did indeed have the ability to control the entire formation, and he could do it in detail. It was just that he was able to control this heaven-suppressing power, and it was only aimed at one person. It wasn't troublesome to do. and it didn't take much effort either. The dragon, Soul, slowly approached. Lin Feng used all the strength in his body to try to move back, but no matter how much strength he exerted, he couldn't even move a single inch. "Don't come over, for the sake of our past relationship. I wasn't the one who targeted you first. It was the few of them who insisted on dragging me along. I was possessed, no matter what. Don't kill me first. They are the ones you should kill." Lin Feng was already on the verge of collapse, whether it was being suppressed or facing the danger of death. Coupled with the repressed emotions from the past month, it all exploded in an instant. There was no way to control his words at all. He just wanted to use all kinds of methods to delay so that he could temporarily linger on. Let Qin Yu kill the others first. As long as he stayed until the end, it would be fine. But the last pleas he let out before he died still had no effect. His eyes widened before he died. He was filled with disbelief and even fear. He didn't think that he would die so easily. His death was too quick and clean. When the others saw his expression before he died, they couldn't help but shiver slightly. At this moment, the few of them no longer had the intention to continue fighting. The only thought in their minds was to escape as far away as possible, as far away as possible. It is impossible for Qin Yu to capture all of them in a short period of time by himself. As long as they could escape from here, there was still a glimmer of hope. Escape. It's not that easy to escape. Suppress. Everyone who wanted to escape was fiercely suppressed. Once again, another big pit was created on the ground. All of them were smashed into a bloody mess. But what made them despair the most was not the wounds on their bodies, but this feeling of helplessness. They had been powerful for so many years, but now it was their turn to be the weak who could be manipulated at will in the hands of others. Their hearts were filled with despair. The few great emperors who hadn't left the range of the formation, once again they were affected by it. They were also suppressed by it. Their bodies were badly mutilated from head to toe. Even if they felt that they had suffered an unexpected disaster, no one dared to say a word, not even a word. After Qin Yu withdrew the power that suppressed them, they hurriedly ran out of the range of the formation. Everyone retreated to a radius of 10 miles, because as long as they took one step closer, all of them would be affected by the power of the attack and even be suppressed. Suddenly, with Floating Light as the leader, a few people joined hands. Dust flew all over the sky. Behind the cloud of dust, there were attacks coming from different people, facing the threat of life and death. All of them used their full strength with great tacit understanding, and they didn't hold back at all. The timing of their attacks was also very similar. It was as if something had formed a chain between them, binding all of them tightly. Qin Yu dodged for a moment. He dodged the dust and countless dangers behind. Then he stood beside everyone very easily. Suddenly his mind moved, and he felt a small movement not far away. He wasn't in a hurry. For the time being, he watched these people run out. Floating Light only thought that he was going to run out in the end. However, in the eyes of everyone, it was the few of them who ran back with a silly smile on their faces. One by one, they ran to Qin Yu's side with a smile on their faces and kept running around him. Then they even let out a cheer. "We finally ran out. Qin, you definitely can't do anything to us now. Let's get out of here, quickly." "That's right. Now, it's time for us to leave quickly." Actually, in terms of strength, he is number one in the entire 10 Directions world. Don't worry so much. He knows that you and I killed the innocent and raised countless children in captivity. Chapter 847. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. There's more. It's a pity that I was able to kill him once, but I can't kill him a second time. The people standing outside the formation heard this incomparably clear sound. The complicated feelings in their hearts couldn't be described in a few words. On one hand, they sympathized with them. On the other hand, they hated them. All of them looked so dignified, but the things they did in private were truly unsightly. They didn't know why, but they all felt like they had already left. Moreover, he didn't hide the things that he had done at all in front of everyone. Now, everyone heard it clearly. Even if someone tried to defend them, there was no evidence. No one was a fool. Suddenly, one of the people in the crowd turned from anxiety to fear, anger, and regret. He was the most loyal dog of the Floating Light Emperor. Just now, he was worried that something might happen. He couldn't wait to rush up and save them. He even thought that even if he had to sacrifice his life, he had to ensure the safety of the Floating Light Emperor. But during this conversation, he had learned of a shocking secret. His son and daughter, who had been missing for many years, had been captured by this bastard and used to refine secret medicine. There were many people in the crowd who had the same thought. All of them were either regretful or angry. They couldn't accept it. They had served their enemy for so many years, and they had been so loyal to him. Now that they thought about it, it was as disgusting as swallowing a dead fly. Qin Yu wasn't surprised at all by what they had done. He had already found out about some of it, but he didn't know about the other part. You've hidden it well. Come out. Even if you hid outside and made up for it in time, you're still at fault. But I'll settle this with you later. For now, let these people go. I still need them to practice with me. Back then, it was written clearly in the letter of challenge. If he didn't die, they would die. He had already thought it through. Now, it was time to fulfill his promise. He had to fulfill everything on the letter of challenge, including the fight to the death. The 8 great emperors instantly woke up, but in their eyes, they felt like the world was spinning. The entire world had suddenly changed. It was as if some kind of curse had been placed on them that they couldn't escape. Even if they left, they would be transported to a place they didn't want to return to in the blink of an eye. But they were still the most powerful in the world. Not long after, they realized that they had only been an illusion. They hadn't been able to leave from the beginning to the end. What made them understand all this? Familiar faces were filled with anger, disgust, or even their eyes. Their hearts were all cold. An indescribable chill slowly spread from his tailbone, until the coldness reached their entire bodies, their limbs and bones. They couldn't help but shiver. Can is translation is translation is translation. The 8 of them were very clear. They are to translation are is they were was they was to themselves. They in be when we're in the in was in the later in the fight later in can was is theirs. In the end, they would only be cursed by tens of thousands of people. But with their strength, they could still live freely. He already had an idea of what he should choose. Qin Yu looked at them with great satisfaction as they displayed the spirit of facing death with equanimity. This was the kind of opponent he wanted. It's not that we can't fight to the death with you, but you can't use the Xian Feather Sky formation to suppress all of us. That's right. That's not a fair fight at all. Just now, they swarmed up together and attacked someone who was more than 1 level lower than them. They didn't feel that it was unfair at all. Now, they were talking about fairness. Qin Yu looked at them with a smile, yet not a smile. After a short while, he agreed. Those people who already hated the several great emperors to the bones were now worried about Qin Yu. They couldn't wait for them to die. As long as these scum were alive, countless vengeful souls would not be able to rest in peace. Their families and friends were among the restless souls. But they couldn't influence Qin Yu's choice. Excitement flashed in the eyes of the 8 people. As expected, Qin Yu didn't care about such small things. No matter what, he had always been very confident in his own strength. Especially at a time like this, it was easy for him to agree to the enemy's small request. They could even see the hope of victory in front of them. As long as they could win, they could regain control of everything. Everything could slowly recover. Een Mountain Cold Wind Palm, Mountain Quaking Fist, Supreme Staff Technique, Vast Pear Blossom Explosion. They were just about to use all their strength to take a gamble. All of a sudden, They felt an extremely powerful suppressive force that they were both familiar with and terrified of. Under the pressure of this suppressive force, they easily dispersed the power they had gathered with great difficulty. Their expressions changed. The great emperor, who had always been lofty and arrogant, cursed out loud. "How can you go back on your words? So everything was a lie. You're just a hypocrite who pretends to be righteous. You say one thing, but in reality you're a hypocrite. If you have the ability, withdraw this suppressive force. Let's have a good competition." Even the people standing outside the formation felt a little stunned. Only the dragon soul sneered. This formation wasn't the mysterious feather heavenly formation. It was the heaven-suppressing battle god formation. One could well imagine the indescribable regret in the hearts of the 8 people that were suppressed upon learning of this matter. They should have asked for the name of this formation first. They shouldn't have blurted out the mysterious feather heavenly formation just because of a sense of familiarity. It was just a difference of a few words, but it brought disaster to them. Regret so much. As for what they regretted, even they couldn't say for sure. Maybe they regretted sneaking up on him, or maybe they regretted shamelessly trying to sneak up on him again and again this time. But in the end, they were still the ones who died. All of them. They were all dead. Qin, you still let them go in the end. But these people had basically lost their fighting spirit. He took out all the martial arts techniques and weapons he had on hand to practice. They were all dead. The last one alive committed suicide. After the last person died, Qin Yu suddenly reached the peak of his realm. He took out a drop of blood essence from the statue and refined it on the spot. Chapter 848. As soon as the divine blood appeared, the surroundings trembled. Everyone's gaze changed. In fact, some of them could not help but become restless, wanting to snatch that supreme treasure. Although no one knew where that drop of crystal-clear blood essence that was like a gem came from, no one knew where it came from. However, everyone seemed to be able to sense the enormous power contained within this drop of blood. It was as if as long as he could fuse with and refine this divine blood, he would be able to reach the pinnacle of perfection. Even breaking through the void and stepping into the 9-fold God realm would not be impossible. However, considering what had happened before, no one dared to take this step. Even if this drop of divine blood was extremely useful to them, they definitely couldn't snatch it away. Otherwise, their fates wouldn't be any better than the previous few. One by one, their bodies were crushed. Even their souls were absorbed and refined on the spot, becoming an endless source of energy for the formation. Roar. The majestic roar seemed to come from ancient times. Something extremely terrifying was about to be born. I have finally found you. Even if I have to flee to the ends of the earth, I'll still punish you for offending my divine might. You actually dared to refine my blood essence? How dare you? But you will pay for it. The void suddenly shattered. A huge dragon head slowly stretched out. It was just a head, but it occupied a corner of the world. Even if all of them were added together, they would not be as tall as this head. Qin Yu turned a deaf ear. Right now he was in a wondrous state and was unable to sense his surroundings. It was as if the scene of the beginning of the world was slowly appearing in front of him, like a picture scroll. The scenes were incomparably clear, but in the blink of an eye, people couldn't remember what they had seen. However, it left an extremely deep impression in his heart. Qin Yu suddenly came to a realization. With a crash, the barrier shattered. The blurry barrier above his head suddenly shattered into pieces with a crisp sound, disappearing into nothingness. At the same time, the aura of Qin Yu, who was about to die in the next moment, suddenly soared. The middle stage of the heavenly palace realm. The late stage of the heavenly palace realm. Great Emperor. However, he didn't stop there. He broke through again, and soon he reached the late stage, and even the Great Circle. What a pity. If I had broken through earlier, I would have been able to achieve great things. That's right. With such a terrifying existence, watching from the side, He definitely won't let him break through as he wishes. For such a powerful existence, even if we join forces, I'm afraid we're just a few ants in his eyes. We're no threat at all. The black dragon god's huge eyes stared at the ant in front of him. He snorted softly. Suddenly, the void on the other side also shattered and a massive hole appeared. The next moment, a black dragon tail appeared. He ruthlessly threw it at Qin. Heaven, immortal stage. Qin figure flashed, and he did not dodge or evade. Instead, he met the incoming dragon tail head-on. A green light flashed through the dark dragon god's dark golden pupils. But the next moment, he was incomparably shocked. Qin had just become a celestial immortal. He was actually able to take his attack head-on. Furthermore, he had even injured his tail and knocked off a piece of scale. A few drops of dark golden dragon blood fell to the ground. In an instant, weeds grew wildly. There was no way for One-Eyed to hide anymore. His tone was filled with excitement. Hurry up and use more strength. This guy's blood actually has a miraculous effect on repairing the ancient remote region. It would be great if there was more. It's only a few drops, and it already has such an effect. If this guy takes out all the blood on his body, even though he knew that the difference in strength between the two was too great. At this moment, he already knew that this was the main culprit that caused the ancient remote region to be on the verge of destruction. Therefore, without even thinking, he blurted out the words in his heart. "You're just an immature false-eye. How dare you covet my god's blood?" The black dragon god could not hold back the anger in his heart. So what if Qin was strong alone? Now he would destroy this martial region. At that time, everyone would die here. So what if he was a celestial immortal? He still did not have the ability to break through the void. Sometimes they would still die here. Not good, master. He actually wants to destroy this martial region. The dragon's soul turned pale with fright. If that was the case, then no one would be able to survive. Although these people were extremely unfamiliar to them, they were all top experts in the 10 Directions world. If they all died, the entire 10 Directions world would be destroyed and fall into chaos. Years of endless war, until the cards were reshuffled a few decades later, or until a new expert appeared a few hundred years later. At that time, the entire situation would be completely stabilized. But before that, there would definitely be a period of chaos. At that time, the ones who would die would not only be the hundreds and thousands of people who entered the ancient remote region. It would be a major event in the entire 10 Directions world. When the black dragon god heard this, he laughed out loud. Accompanied by this laughter, the entire ancient remote region began to shatter and was even on the verge of collapse. The cracks in the abyss, which had not appeared for countless years, appeared once again, cutting the fragments that were already extremely fragmented into smaller pieces. In the blink of an eye, the ancient remote region was already fragmented. Most places were unavoidable. Miserable screams could be heard from a slightly distant place, but soon there was silence. Hearing this, people felt a chill down their spine. Qin voice became colder and colder. He raised his head and looked at the world that was almost completely shattered and disappeared between heaven and earth. Suddenly, under everyone's gaze, he slowly raised his hand. The black dragon god suddenly felt a wisp of immortal qi. This wisp of immortal qi came from Qin. "No, how is this possible? You obviously haven't gone to the ninefold god realm yet. Where the hell did you get this immortal qi?" No one answered him. Everyone was still holding on to their hope, looking at the extremely weak light on Qin fingertip. A celestial immortal holding a wisp of immortal qi is enough to communicate with the ninefold god realm. Under the unwilling roar of the black dragon god, a pure white, holy light gate slowly opened. Holy light shone everywhere. Qin body involuntarily rose up slowly. This was the gate of guidance. The environment in the ancient remote region was really too bad, and it was even on the verge of collapse. That was why the gate of guidance had not appeared before, because the space here was unstable. But now, by relying on that wisp of immortal Qin Yu had successfully attracted the gate of guidance. The dazzling white light brought great pressure to the black dragon god, and in the midst of his unwilling roar, all the holes were repaired. Countless abysses were filled one after another, and the fragments were pieced together again. Even the stubborn abysses at the beginning were erased at the same time. Chapter 849. After countless years, the ancient abyss was once again pieced together, forming a complete world. In time, countless lives would be born, under the illumination of the light of guidance. Everyone present had more or less benefited greatly from it. Some people's hidden injuries were silently healed. Some people saw the door of light and felt the boundless immortal energy from it. Thus, they had a slight understanding of the future. There were a few peak great emperors on the spot. Not long after, they could also step into a higher level and enter a new world. But now, all of them could only look at Qin Yu with envy. Step by step, as if there were stairs under his feet, he stepped into the door of light. He gradually merged into the door of light. The dragon's soul followed suit, until the two figures completely disappeared. Only then did everyone realize that everything around them had changed. The ancient abyss had changed from a world on the verge of destruction to a completely different appearance. Everywhere was peaceful, except for the absence of birds and the fragrance of flowers. It looked very complete. The ground was covered in green grass, and the air was filled with a sweet fragrance. The sky was a faint green color, with a few clouds floating by occasionally. Soon, this place would become a normal martial domain. The only thing that was unusual, that was the huge pile of treasures at the side. Looking at the pile of treasures, very few people dared to snatch them. Since we're already here, let's take some things. There are so many things. Even if each of us takes one, we won't take too much. That's right, if each of us only takes one, it shouldn't anger him. Everyone looked at each other, and in the end, each of them chose to take one thing. But they didn't go overboard and restrain themselves a little. No one knew if these things had an owner, and they also didn't know if Qin Yu cared about these things. So they didn't dare to go overboard. Qin Yu had reached a higher level, and even left the 10 Directions world. But what if he turned around and wanted to take a look? Who dared to bear his wrath, and who had the strength to do so? However, these people did not know that there was indeed no one watching over the ancient antiquity region. If they wanted to, they could take all of these things away. This was because the true caretaker of the ancient remote domain, One-Eyed, had followed Qin Yu to the ninefold divine world. Only the god realm was filled with experts. Qin Yu walked out of the light gate. Then he saw a colorful cloud. There was also a pure white cloud under his feet. It didn't look very sturdy, but it was worry-free to walk on it. Everyone was in a hurry. He quickly flashed past him. Occasionally, someone would stop and look at him. However, he merely glanced at it and frowned slightly. After that, she still quickly passed by him without any intention of stopping, let alone talking to him. "Master, it looks like something has happened. Should we go and take a look?" The dragon's soul didn't put those people in its eyes. The most important thing was its attitude. By chance, he saw a person from the lower realm. However, these people were not curious at all. Instead, they seemed to be in a hurry. Moreover, everyone was like this. It was a little surprising. Something must have happened for it to become like this. Qin Yu wasn't that curious. He roughly chose a direction to walk in. In fact, it was just a random direction. No matter what those people were doing, if he, a celestial immortal, went over rashly, he would be taking a risk. Among the people who passed by them, there were many who were extremely strong. There was no need to fight with these people for opportunities. That would only happen after entering the ninefold divine world. All he did was provoke group after group of enemies for himself. After looking at the surroundings for a while and walking around for a while, Qin Yu had some guesses in his mind. This should be the celestial realm of the ninefold divine world. It should be the effect of the strand of celestial qi that he took out earlier. Therefore, the door of guidance had directly thrown him here. However, this place was also good. Xiantian Shenzhen should be in this world. After walking forward for a while, he saw a city floating between the clouds. Wisps of clouds formed a thick and heavy door, blocking all people with bad intentions. It also vaguely covered most of the city. If one simply stood in the distance, they would not be able to see the city, no matter what method they used. When they approached, there were layers of guards checking them. Please take out your identity token. Qin Yu glanced at the dragon's soul. Both of them had just come up. How could they have any identity tokens in their hands? Xiantian Shenzhen hadn't mentioned it before either. Coming to the celestial realm of the ninefold divine world, they actually needed an identity token. Of course, they would be taken away for questioning without any preparation. Just became a celestial immortal. Plus, you seem to know nothing. You must be from the lower realm. Name, age, and strength. When it came to age, the person recording them was indeed stunned, because they were really too young. Even if they were outstanding geniuses of the celestial realm, they would not be able to do so. In such a short period of time, they would definitely not be able to possess such great strength. Furthermore, Qin Yu was from the lower realm. They were not willing to even talk about such a barren place, although they had heard that some of the greater beings liked to take in people from the lower realm as disciples. But they had never seen anyone with such great capabilities. To have obtained such achievements at such a young age, breaking through to the heavenly immortal realm with his own strength and overcoming all sorts of difficulties, they could not help but be shocked. "The one beside you!" Qin Yu smiled and placed his hand on the table, leaning forward slightly. "This is my companion. Do you have any objections?" The person recording them shook his head. Of course, he could not have any objections. He was only here to record. He did not know what kind of identity such a talented person had. Of course, he would not offend him if he could. Furthermore, he did not see any benefits from these people. He could only sigh at his bad luck. This trip was not a good one. Soon he finished recording all the records. Qin Yu and the Dragon Soul had also received their identity tokens. Even the one-eyed man had received a token. However, this token was very small and exquisite. It was only Qin Yu's subordinate. Basically, it did not have any rights at all. If they were to run away in public, they would be punished. Naturally, he was a little unwilling. At that time, he had not thought of following them. The ancient remote region had already been repaired. He was free and unfettered there. How could he not be free and unfettered? Chapter 850. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Calamity. But who would have thought that after Qin Yu disappeared, he would be pulled up as well? Who asked you to agree to it? Since you agreed, it has already taken effect. The dragon's soul unceremoniously swayed the one-eyed man. Because he only had one eye, it was more convenient to call him one-eyed. Hence, it did not change his name. Their group did not attract anyone's attention when they appeared on the streets. There were people everywhere, and it looked like a surging tide. From time to time, a few figures would flash across the sky. They would directly pass through the city gates and leave. They did not go through any checks, and the guards could only helplessly look at the few figures leaving. The people around him were whispering to each other. Because they were closer, Qin Yu also heard these words. "Did you see those people? They can be so arrogant because they are strong. Those people are all Xian immortal experts." Who says they aren't? The leader of the few people who flew over is not only a profound immortal. According to what I know, he seems to have a master and a senior brother who are also very powerful. That's right, not to mention his master, Taoist Lu Guang. Even his senior brother has reached the immortal soul realm. Qin Yu followed their line of sight and saw the backs of those people as they left. Immortal soul? They can only be called Taoist, so their strength should only be ordinary. When he returned to the city, it was still peaceful. The city was in chaos, and it was extremely difficult to find any news about someone. Currently, he could only take one step at a time. From the words of others, Qin Yu also found out a piece of news. Not far away, at the peak of Sky Spirit Mountain, a treasure seemed to have appeared. Someone saw a 7-colored light on it, and seemed to hear the cry of a deer. All in all, there were all kinds of people saying. Some were rumors, but there were still people who believed that a portion of it should be true. After all, everyone saw the 7-colored light with their own eyes. But anyone who saw the 7-colored light would be attracted by it and could not help but want to get closer. It was as if something was calling them closer. Qin Yu only smiled and shook his head. Very few people would notice a celestial immortal standing to the side, who did not have much of a presence. However, he just happened to glance over and noticed that he had just shaken his head. The people who were talking about what they had seen and heard were not very happy. Why are you shaking your head? Are you dissatisfied with what I just said? Could it be that you have doubts? If you have any suspicions, you can just say it out loud. There's no need for you to hide in the dark and not come out. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Qin Yu did not panic at all. He shook his head gently. He shook his head again. It's not a question, nor is it a suspicion. I'm just curious, that's all. Exactly what kind of treasure would attract so many people? Is that 7-colored light really because of a treasure? For a moment, the expressions of the onlookers changed drastically. Just now, they were all listening with great interest, to the extent where they were even anxious, feeling a bit regretful that they couldn't fight for the treasures. But now, after hearing this, it seemed that it was a good thing that they didn't get any spots, regardless of whether what he said was true or not. In short, they did feel a lot better. The crowd gradually dispersed, and the storyteller's face was full of confusion. He didn't know how things had turned out like this. When he came back to his senses, there was already no one in front of him. My business. He only relied on telling stories to make a living. Most of the things he said were half-truths, which attracted a lot of people. If someone wanted to get something from him, they would give him a reward. If someone was happy to hear it, they would also give him a little money. But now he couldn't do business today. How good would it be if that person didn't come? Then today's business would be very good. Maybe I would have a month's worth of rations. But now everything was gone. Not to mention a month's worth of rations. He couldn't even do business today. Suddenly, someone quietly walked up behind him. I heard that you know a lot of things. These things are for you as a reward. I want to ask you about a few people. Lulu turned around and didn't see anyone. Instead, he saw a big black sack. The bag was bulging, and it looked very old. At first glance, it was obvious that there was nothing good in it. Maybe it was just some junk. After all, the sack was already like this. What good things could be in it? This was a sack that ordinary people used to store garbage. It was just some useless waste. You want to buy information from me with a pile of garbage? Aren't you underestimating me a little too much? Although he said that, he still took the sack. Even if it was just some garbage today, it would be good. He didn't get anything today. Those people were interrupted halfway through the story and finally left. So he didn't get anything. Even if it was a pile of garbage, it was still a gain. However, when he opened it, he was completely dumbfounded. He couldn't even straighten his tongue. There were all kinds of small magic tools everywhere, and they weren't too bad. Although they weren't very useful to those who were strong. If he took all of these things, it would be enough to cover his income for a year. With so many things, it was simply too worth it to just exchange for a piece of information. I didn't recognize Mount Tai before. Hee, what are you looking for, sir? No matter what it is, I can give you accurate information. Lulu said this, but he was more or less cursing in his heart. He thought that he was very good at judging people. But who would have thought that there were so many valuable things in an incomparably shabby sack? He didn't expect that there would be such a large amount of wealth in it. When he turned around and saw the face, clearly Lulu couldn't smile. Wasn't this the guy who disrupted his business just now? He was still talking about it just now. Now that he was caught red-handed, it wasn't just awkward. It could clearly explain the complicated feelings in his heart. It didn't matter. He was thick-skinned. At most, he would curry favor more. Qin Yu listened to the story at the side for a while and knew that the words from this person's mouth were half true and half false. Not all of them were necessarily true, but at least not all of them were false. Moreover, he knew a lot of things. It was precisely because he knew a lot of things that Qin Yu came to find him. Have you heard of Xiantian Senzin? Lulu was stunned for a moment and shook his head hesitantly. In the celestial world, there are only a few Senzin. Chapter 851. I've never heard of the Xiantian Senzin you mentioned. Did you remember wrongly? Speaking of which, the Xiantian Senzin had not returned for many years. It was normal for him not to know about this person at his age. Forget it. It seems like you don't know anything. It's just an undeserved reputation. Qin Yu waved his hand and did not plan to stay here any longer. Since he had given away those things, he would not ask for them back. They were just some useless things. They were useless to him before, and they were useless to him now. On the contrary, Lulu was a little embarrassed. He had thought that someone was deliberately making things difficult for him. But from the looks of it, who would spend so much money to make things difficult for him? Qin Yu and the Dragon Soul found a place to stay for the time being. The next day at dawn, Lulu came looking for them. No one knew where he got the news from, but he found the two of them early in the morning. The moment he arrived, he made a big fuss and attracted the attention of many people. Many people cast their gazes over. There were actually many people who knew Lulu. They all greeted him one after another. Lulu did not even bother to pay attention to these people. He was merely sizing up Qin Yu with a curious expression. Why don't you work for me? You're too accurate. There's something strange about that treasure. Many people have gone missing there. It seems like there's no chance of survival. As long as you work for me, you'll be able to eat and drink well. Countless resources will be sent to you first. How about it? My conditions should be very generous. If it were anyone else, they would definitely not be able to take it out. Qin Yu calmly listens to him and slowly walks to one side. He walked out of the door, and the Dragon's Soul followed closely behind. The two of them left one after the other. Lulu stayed in place with a face full of shock. Although this was an expected result, he was still a little surprised that Yi Xuan didn't say anything and just left like that. He did not even have the chance to say what he had in mind. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. Unfortunately, even if he chased after them now, he would not be able to find them. It was as if they had disappeared without a trace in an instant. There were people everywhere. It was extremely difficult to find two people among so many people. However, he later found out that the two of them hadn't checked out yet, so they would probably come back. Thus, he waited in the same spot. He wanted to see if he could wait for the two of them to come back together. He walked around outside. Qin Yu also gained a better understanding of the immortal world. There were 9 realms within the ninefold divine world. The immortal world was one of them. Only the heavenly, immortal, mystic immortal realm was a realm that was universally acknowledged no matter where it was. Once they reached a higher level, they would have to choose which realm to go to. This would involve a lot of things, and it was also a second choice besides ascension. Of course, those who grew up in the ninefold divine realm did not need to make so many choices. Basically, wherever they were born, they would continue to advance. It had been many years since someone with tyrannical strength had ascended from below. Since ancient times, such people tended to be even more powerful. Therefore, some people would choose their own disciples in the lower realms. However, such people tended to be fewer because it was easy to nurture a group of seedlings that died young. Even if it was a peerless genius, wanting to ascend was extremely difficult. That was something that was almost impossible. No matter how strong one was, it was impossible. Only a very small number of people with great luck and talent could ascend from below. And in the process, they had to go through many trials and tribulations before they could ascend. The immortal world is also extremely complicated. Like before, there are a few major forces that monopolize all the resources. The remaining small sects and clans were suppressed to the point that they could not develop. He had also gone to other places to inquire, and there was indeed no Xiantian Senzin in the immortal world. He did not know if it was because his master had left the immortal world for so long that everyone had forgotten about his existence, or if there was some other secret. However, it was not easy to find him now by asking around. Qin Yu prepared to take a look at the major forces. Among them, the most powerful was the Xiantian sect. Just because of Xiantian's order, he had to take a look. Lulu waited at the same spot for close to a day and night before seeing the two of them return. Of course, even at night, the immortal cloud city was still covered in a hazy radiance. At most, the color of the clouds was slightly dimmer. Everyone used the color of the clouds to determine the current time. Although at their level, very few people would judge the time. However, this could really determine when they should rest and when they should do something. You guys are finally back. I've been waiting for you guys here for so long. Why haven't I seen you guys? I thought you guys weren't coming back. Do you guys want to consider what I said previously? I'm definitely sincere in wanting to cooperate with you guys, even if it's just for a moment. This time, Qin Yu walked past him like he did in the morning and arrived at the side. Then he returned to his own room. If Lulu liked to wait, he could wait by himself. He had his own things to do and was not in the mood to mess around with others. In the room, the dragon's soul was hesitating. Based on the way they were searching, they might not be able to find anyone even after searching for a long time. If they wanted to find him, they had to consider other methods. For example, with the help of others. If that's the case, the person outside the door is also a good choice. His strength is weak, and he has some connections. Everyone in this city knows him. If he's a guarantor, we can obviously get in touch with more people. After the dragon's soul finished eating, he did not get a response. However, he knew that Qin Yu was already considering it. After all, this was not a small matter. He could not just randomly find someone. Careful consideration was needed in terms of candidates. However, Qin Yu did not think for long before he made a decision. He would cooperate with Lulu, but the method of cooperation had to be decided by him. The relationship between the two of them had to be discussed in advance. Other than the cooperation, other things had nothing to do with each other. They would not ask about each other's identity and purpose. Lulu was extremely touched. He wanted to say this. In this world, who did not have a secret? Others had secrets, and so did he. Moreover, some things were not convenient to say. All right, since you're so straightforward, let's cooperate immediately. Lulu could not wait to take out a contract. The so-called contract was a contract that was notarized by heaven and earth. This could ensure that both of them strictly followed the standards discussed at the beginning. Chapter 852. There's no need for a contract. What I want to do is very simple. I just want you to introduce me to the Cloud Immortal City's City Lord. Can you do that? Before Lulu could say yes, he almost bit his tongue. Introduce him to the City Lord. If he could build a relationship with the City Lord, would he still need to tell stories all day long? This was simply nonsense. Where was he going to find the City Lord? However, looking at the serious look in the doctor's eyes, he could not say anything to reject him. Speaking of which, he just happened to have a solution. However, it was extremely risky. He was going to take a huge risk. However, was it really worth taking such a huge risk for a stranger whom he had just met for 2 days? At this moment, he did not know if this was a coincidence or if Qin Yu had already asked around. So much so that he was able to predict him so accurately. He even knew that he just happened to have a way to introduce him to the City Lord. This is very dangerous. Both you and I will have to take a huge risk. If you are sure. Lulu felt that he had already expressed his intention very clearly. Of course, he would have to pay him a certain amount of remuneration. Since he was going to take such a huge risk, then it was natural for him to take a portion of the benefits. I know that you must have something to do with the city lord. According to our agreement, I will not ask. However, if there are any benefits, you have to share half with me. Qin Yu smiled. He was afraid that there would not be any benefits then. However, it was useless to say such things to a person who only cared about profits. He would not believe it. Hence, there was no need to explain. Explaining would be useless. Also, you just need to know that I am going to do such a thing. So what if it is dangerous? Bring me there. Qin Yu walked in front with a straight posture. He had already found out the location of the city lord's residence yesterday. Lulu was not sure what he was going to do there. It did not seem like he was going to do anything. Instead, it seemed like he was going to seek revenge. However, logically speaking, that should not be the case. However, he was a little unsure. Perhaps his guess was wrong. With a perturbed mood, he finally found the person who had helped him a lot in the past. With the help of this little bit of kindness, he couldn't do much. There was actually very little that could be done. He could only try his best to use some extreme means to attract the city lord's attention. It could be said that Lulu had come up with a rotten idea. First, he went to find that acquaintance of his and had a long discussion. That person carefully sized up Qin Yu. He looks pretty good, but can you guarantee his strength? A heavenly immortal can only be considered as not bad. Lulu didn't know how much, but the only possibility was that he was exaggerating. It was said that although Qin Yu was only at the heaven immortal stage, when the two of them joined forces, their strength was comparable to an immortal soul. Just say whatever you can. He praised her as if she was one of a kind. In the end, the corner of that person's mouth twitched as he looked at the two of them. In fact, no matter how relaxed he looked on the surface, Lulu was still quite nervous. If something were to happen at this time, everything would be over. He also had to take a huge risk to send people in through the back door. Lu Chong looked at the two of them and nodded. They did look pretty good, but in terms of strength, he had to check again. Of course, he didn't believe a single word that he said before. But after all, they were acquaintances. This time, after stuffing these two people in, he could be considered to have returned the favor. After that, he didn't have to care about this person at all. Then I'll test the strength of the two of you. If you can take it, then take it. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly attacked with lightning speed, bringing about a sound that pierced through the air. Qin Yu merely stood there and watched without attacking. However, the dragon soul, with the help of its own talent, easily blocked the attack. He could control time. Whether it was attacking or defending, he had a unique advantage. Although there was a huge difference in strength, the effect was slightly worse. But it was still easy to face a Xian immortal. He was even certain that he had the ability to defeat him. Lu Chang's expression changed. As for Lulu, he had long been frightened by this change. He was only at the heaven immortal stage. He originally thought that as long as he said a few good words, at most he would give some gifts and it would be fine. Who knew that he would attack just like that? Sure enough, his favor was nothing at all, when the sound of air piercing through the air exploded in his ears. The back and forth had already ended. How did you take it? Forget it. This is your own matter. I won't ask any more. But your strength has already reached the standard. Not to mention the others. Just you alone is enough. Lu Chong was quite satisfied. Although he had to return the favor, strength was the most important hurdle. Even if he was in charge of the recruitment, he couldn't easily say that he could put anyone in. If that was the case, he would lose his position sooner or later. Now that his strength had reached the standard, he could also return the favor. That couldn't be better. For him, it was killing two birds with one stone. The last procedure was done. They could go in directly in the afternoon. However, when they came back, Lulu hugged his head and cried, "If I had known that you were so strong, I wouldn't have to use my own favor to exchange for it. Now, I let that old man return my favor. My loss is huge. That old man really didn't leave me any face at all. He clearly said that he would return the favor, but he still tried to test you. How despicable. Qin Yu said with a smile. It was just human nature. For Steward Liu, this was killing two birds with one stone. He had no reason to disagree. Of course, these things just didn't have to be taken to heart. What he cared about the most was when he could see the city lord. He couldn't get accurate information from others. As a powerful expert, the city lord could not have any information, right? It was even more impossible for him to be ignorant. At this point, Lulu had already developed some fear towards them. Such a powerful person had been with him all this time. His strength had already surpassed that of a celestial immortal. But on the surface, he was just an ordinary celestial immortal. It was just that his combat strength was extraordinary. At the same time that he was extremely shocked, it also left a shadow in his heart. Can you tell me the truth? What exactly do you want to do? He thought that he might not be able to get the answer, but unexpectedly he did hear the answer. This answer also caught him off guard. It was just to find someone. Chapter 853. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The city, Lord of Cloud Immortal City, lived in seclusion, but he had a good reputation outside. He looked a little plump and always had a friendly smile on his face. However, his strength was not to be underestimated. It's you guys. I heard that you guys have just entered the heavenly immortal realm, but you are already comparable to a Xian immortal, or even slightly stronger. Tell me, why are you looking for me? I don't think my reputation has spread to the lower realm. The ninefold god realm was completely separated from the lower realm. Even the god realms were not connected. Under such circumstances, the city lord's reputation could not spread to other places. Qin Yu was not surprised that his identity had been found out. After all, he and the dragon soul were registered here, and it was quite special. If the city lord wanted to find out, it would not be difficult at all. All he had to do was to give orders, and their whereabouts over the past few days would be placed on the city lord's desk. However, Qinju only knew some basic information about them. The city lord did not know where they came from and why they were looking for him. I just want to ask you about the Profound Heaven sect, Yi Fuqian said. The city lord of Cloud Mountain City had always been in contact with the Xiantian sect. This was not a secret. However, a heavenly immortal who had just arrived in an unfamiliar environment. He actually wanted to find out about the Xiantian sect. The city lord was slightly surprised. He thought about it, but was not in a hurry to ask. Some basic information could be found elsewhere, so there was no need for him to hide it. The Xiantian sect had been established for a long time, and it was one of the top forces in the heavenly immortal realm. The only force that could go against it was Ba Shan Palace. No one knew when it was established, but it had at least tens of thousands of years of history. You said that every sect leader of the Xiantian sect was called Xiantian. Qin Yu finally heard a key point from the pile of nonsense. This kind of nonsense could be heard outside. However, it was rarely useful. It could be said casually to the city lord, but it could be said to others that it was difficult to find out. This was the reason why he came to find the city lord. Now he picked out a key point from the pile of nonsense. Then do you know Xiantian Shenzhen? Currently, he only knew that Xiantian Shenzhen had returned to the ninefold divine realm before him. However, he did not know Xiantian Shenzhen's exact location. He had also never heard of the Xiantian sect before. Xiantian Shenzhen had never mentioned this name before. His intuition told him that the Profound Heaven sect had something to do with the Profound Heaven Shenzhen. The city lord of Cloud Mountain City raised his head. Why are you asking this? The sect master of the Cloud Sky sect has reached the realm of Shenzhen, so he should use this title. As far as I know, Shenzhen hasn't appeared in the Profound Heaven sect for several generations. The strongest sect master is merely an immortal emperor. He can dominate a region. However, Shenzhen's realm is already unparalleled in the world. In this immortal world, there is no place that he cannot go. With his strength alone, he can fight against an entire sect. In fact, Senzen had not appeared in the immortal world for some time. Occasionally there would be Senzen, but they were all old monsters who had hidden away from the world. Some large sects would raise these old monsters and invest countless resources every year. However, these people did not show their faces at all. Therefore, people only knew of their existence, but no one had ever seen them. At this moment, he heard the name of Senzen from a young man who had just reached the heaven realm. The city lord could not help but be shocked. However, he did not know when an old monster in the heavenly venerable realm had gone to the lower realm and taken in a disciple. Qin Yu only glanced at him coldly. You don't need to know so much. I'm just here to ask you about some things. His attitude was not arrogant, but he was not polite at all. He did not fawn on him like ordinary people. However, the city lord did not take this matter to heart. Instead, he found it very interesting. After all, this was the arrogance that only belonged to a peerless genius. After all, some people in this world were proud of the world from the moment they were born. This was a talent that no one could be envious of. It was obvious that the city lord regarded Qin Yu and the dragon's soul as such. Xiantian Senzen might have some relationship with the Xiantian sect, but he should not be there. That was because no one had heard of any powerful Senzen in the Xiantian sect. They were all old monsters who had never left the sect before. He couldn't get any more information from the city lord. However, if he wanted to come into contact with other places, he would more or less need the city lord. Qin Yu took out the contract that Lulu gave him. He placed it in front of the city lord. Why don't we make an agreement? He looked at the young man in front of him, who was many times younger than him. The city lord of Cloud Immortal City smiled and pressed his fingerprint on the contract. After all, this contract would only bring him benefits and no harm. Moreover, it was notarized. Anyone who violated the contract would die a horrible death. Someone had already tried, but no one could come out unscathed. After violating the contract, they either died without a complete corpse or died a horrible death. He was an open person. Although he disguised himself with a wise appearance, he never hid anything. He was open and above board. After the contract was established, it split into two and turned into two golden lights that entered the glabella of the two. Vaguely, the two of them had a subtle connection. If one did not pay attention, their presence would be so weak that one would not notice it. However, if one had the thought of violating the contract, one would feel that the binding force was very obvious, constantly reminding them of the existence of the contract. It seems that we have reached a preliminary agreement. I look forward to the day you complete the contract. Stay with me for the time being. How about I provide food and accommodation? The city lord laughed and left. Lu Chong had not seen the city lord so happy for many years. For a moment, his heart was filled with admiration and his attitude became more respectful. If he had known earlier, his attitude towards the two of them would have been better. However, it was not too late now. Qin Yu was led to an extremely luxurious room. There were exquisite decorations everywhere. A faint mist lingered around, and everywhere was filled with immortal aura. This was an excellent place for cultivation. It was also an extremely comfortable, small spiritual land. However, the dragon soul was not very satisfied with this place. Isn't the city lord obviously trying to make us pay more when the time comes? It is written clearly in the contract. Whatever he gives us in these 3 months, we have to pay him back 100 times in 3 months. Now that he has taken out such a small spiritual land, it is obvious that he is trying to make us unable to complete the contract. So many things looked good, but they did not completely belong to them. Chapter 854. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. If an ordinary person received such treatment, they might not be able to return it in a short period of time. Moreover, they had agreed to return it 100 times. That was 100 times. In other words, even if the organization gave them a dagger, they would have to return the city lord at least 100 daggers of the same quality after 3 months. If they were given a small spiritual land for them to live in temporarily, they would have to give the city lord a small spiritual land that he could use for a long time. Lu Chong left silently. He had no right to participate in these matters. After walking in, the dragon's soul saw a small celestial pond. The celestial chi inside was so dense that it turned into mist and dripped down. Isn't this better? If we have a good environment, we can use this to obtain more. The more he gives, the easier it is for him to get more in return. I was afraid that he wouldn't dare to give. Now it seems that he is a courageous person. Qin Yu was never afraid of not being able to return the favor. Since they had made a contract, he was confident. That meant that he was extremely confident in himself, and that he would be able to return everything he had obtained 100-fold within the agreed time. The dragon's soul looked at every city here. The more he looked, the more shocked he became. The city lord had indeed given them the best environment. Everywhere was the best. He even suspected that the city lord himself did not live in such a good place. At this moment, the Cloud Immortal City's city lord was being questioned by his subordinates. He had given such a good environment to two people who did not seem strong and whose identities were unknown. As expected, many people did not agree. However, since he was the city lord, he was the most powerful person in this city. Once he made a decision, he could not change it. Say no more. I have already made my decision. All your doubts are questioning my decision. Under the effect of the contract, even if he made me waste 3 months of my time. So what? In the end, he still has to pay the price. However, if he can succeed, he will get 100 times the profit. Compared to the initial investment that I can take back at any time, it is obvious that I can get more profit from it. Moreover, the risk is very low. Of course, he had already calculated everything. Even if the contract wasn't completed, he wouldn't be considered to have suffered a loss. Everything that was given out could fall back into his hands at any time. However, if he succeeded, not only would he have made friends with two extremely talented and powerful people, but he would also gain 100-fold profit. Why wouldn't he do it? To him, this was a matter of benefit and no harm. He had added all the benefits himself. Of course, it was also an observation. He wanted to see if the two of them would be blinded by the riches and honor in front of them and do something unwise. However, the attitude of these two people was much better than he had imagined, especially Qin Yu's unperturbed appearance. He admired him very much. Unfortunately, this person was obviously quite arrogant. It was impossible for him to be taken in as a subordinate. The only thing he could do was to befriend him. On the first day that Qin Yu moved into the city lord manor, he ran into some trouble. A dignified young man came looking for trouble. His strength was already at the heavenly immortal realm. He held a soft sword in his hand and casually waved it around, looking handsome and neat. It's the two of you who snatched my place. Originally, we agreed that this place would belong to me once I became a heavenly immortal. Who knew that just as I broke through, someone told me that someone came to take over my place. This young man looked somewhat similar to the city lord, so they must be related by blood. If he wasn't a blood descendant, then he must be someone who was very close to the family. It was also because of this that this young man must have received the best opportunity since he was young. Although he looked young, his strength was not to be underestimated. His attitude was even more arrogant. However, he also had the capital to be arrogant. If this young man casually stood outside, he would attract a kind of exclamation and exclaim that a genius was born from a young man. It was a pity that there were too many geniuses who had been defeated by Qin Yu. He looked down on these so-called geniuses who had been piled up with resources and had not gone through any training. If it was someone who had been through hundreds of battles and was full of experience, he would look up to him. At least that was achieved through his own efforts, unlike this young man in front of him. He had just broken through, and his realm was unstable, so he came to provoke them. You shouldn't have come to me for this matter. The city lord asked people to bring us here, so this is our temporary residence. If you have any questions, you can go to the city lord to answer them. There's no need to come here and show off in front of us." Whether it was Qin Yu's tone or every word he said, it could be said that he was following the rules. He was just a young man who didn't know any better. He had been spoiled since he was young and had a temper. Naturally, he wouldn't argue with such a child. However, the young man looked as if he had been greatly insulted. He was so angry that his face turned red, and he pointed the tip of his sword casually. A dark golden light flashed past. The young man suddenly shouted and threw the weapon in his hand. What was the golden light? He didn't see it clearly, but when the sword fell to the ground, it had already broken into two. There was obviously a bite mark in the middle. Something had bitten the arrow in the middle and even ate the piece of metal. "What is this? You must have done it, right?" On one hand he was frightened, and on the other hand he was angry. The young man's face was red and white. It could be said that it was very interesting. Qin Yu felt that he had been wronged. This time he didn't touch him, although he was unhappy. Looking at the young man's bone age, he was indeed a child who hadn't grown up. Of course, there was a limit to his tolerance, but he wouldn't use such methods to scare him. However, no matter whether he defended himself or not, the young man would still believe that he was the one who did it. "I must tell father about this. I must let him see your true colors. You actually destroyed my weapon." In the end, this matter was brought up to the city lord of Cloud Mountain City. After hearing the entire story, he looked at the broken sword and sighed helplessly. Anyone could tell at a glance that the reason why the sword was damaged was because something had completely bitten it. How could a person bite a sword to pieces? This was simply too absurd. The young man didn't let it go, and the city lord was somewhat protective of his son. However, the city lord was still reasonable. He just sat in the middle and mediated, saying that this matter would pass like this. The young man suddenly raised his head. He looked at Qin Yu again. "You are Qin Yu?" Qin Yu and the dragon's soul looked at each other and nodded. Chapter 855. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. There were very few people in the ninefold god realm who were related to them. They could be counted on one's fingers. However, the next moment the young man shouted, "You're the one who knew that the treasure was fake, but didn't say anything. Do you know that my good brother Chi-Chuan was seriously injured because of this? Since you know about this, you should announce it quickly. Why did you stand there and watch so many people die?" Furthermore, at that time, Qin Yu had just arrived and didn't know what had happened at all. Even if he said it, people would only think that he was exaggerating. There were quite a few people who heard what he said, but none of them believed him. Everyone believed that it was the birth of a treasure, and no one wanted to miss this opportunity. Before he left, he even thought that it would be better if more people believed what he said. That way, they would have fewer competitors. If they did not take it to heart, how could he remind them? Qin Yu was not willing to play around with a kid. A kid who did not know anything might have been tricked into being a tool. However, the city lord of the Cloud Immortal City was a wily old fox. The moment Lan Feng said that, he already felt that something was wrong. If there were many people with such thoughts, even if there were only a few dozen of them, it would definitely be a big problem for Qin Yu. After all, he had just arrived and did not have any foundation. Although he was very strong, very few people knew about it. Everyone would only think that he had no background and could be easily manipulated. However, he could not understand the motive of the person behind this. Qin Yu could guess that it was probably because the treasure was exposed. Lulu had never been the kind of person who could keep things to himself. From the very beginning, he had thought of such a possibility. However, he did not expect that the person who wanted to trick him would make such a big deal out of something, he said casually. There was no exact number of people who were injured, but according to rumors, it was not a small number. Quite a number of people died. Many people lost an arm or a leg because of this. Everyone knew how troublesome it was to repair it. Even if it could be repaired in the future, what about the time wasted and the suffering? Why aren't you saying anything? Poor Chi-Chuan, he did not know about this at first. If he knew earlier that he was so cautious, he would not have gone. he would not have been injured by that evil dragon and even lost 2 legs. Lan Feng was still a little overbearing. However, he was much weaker and his eyes were filled with tears. He thought of sad things. His tone was getting worse. In the end, Chengzhu could not bear it and sent him away. Out of sight, out of mind. However, Qin Yu did not leave. This was the first news he had heard about dragons since he had arrived in the ninefold God realm. Although it was an evil dragon, it was an evil dragon. Who said dragon was an evil dragon? The city lord immediately felt that something was wrong. If it was someone's, his translation was someone's. Before, you tell me what you. I've invested a lot in you. Don't do anything stupid. It was quite rare for a city lord to show such an expression. It was a rare look of seriousness. He had also viewed Qin Yu as an extremely talented member of the younger generation and had the intention of grooming Qin Yu. Even if he couldn't win Yi Shiwen over to his side, he still threw out his own olive branch. Since he had taken him in, he had to pay more attention to his safety. After all, he did not want such a good seedling to die in the hands of the evil dragon. There were many people who went, not to mention celestial immortals. There were even many mystic immortals. But none of them made it back alive. The strongest ones were the first to suffer. That evil dragon was not interested in ordinary celestial immortals. It was just playing with them. That was why some celestial immortals escaped. However, in the situation at that time, that evil dragon could have killed everyone in one fell swoop. It just looked down on celestial immortals. It only treated celestial immortals as snacks. If it accidentally killed them, it would stuff them into its mouth. The scene at that time was really like the Dark Realm. It was bloody beyond compare. Lord, City Lord, haven't you always been virtuous? Since such a thing has happened, the most important thing now is to get rid of that evil dragon to prevent it from wreaking havoc. I think the first to suffer would be Cloud Immortal City. Of course, the City Lord knew this. However, even if he knew this, he knew how strong the evil dragon was. It was impossible for him to do it alone. If he wanted to find experts from the outside world, he would have to pay a huge price. Fortunately, the evil dragon was trapped in the same place for some reason and could not enter or leave at will. Therefore, it was impossible for it to do the same thing again in a short period of time. To Cloud Immortal City, it was just a dangerous place that was slightly closer. To them, there was not much loss. If someone wanted to get rid of the evil dragon, they would have to stay in Cloud Immortal City. At that time, he could take the opportunity to befriend them. There might even be experts sent by the big forces. I do want to go and take a look, but I'm not going to get rid of the evil dragon. He just wanted to subdue the evil dragon. The city lord thought that he understood Qin Yu's intention. He just wanted to take a look. He immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Anyway, in his opinion, with Qin Yu's strength, he would only be courting death if he went. No one thought that a person in the Heaven Mountain realm could defeat an evil dragon that was at least in the Immortal Soul realm. Qin Yu did not think so. The evil dragon might not be that strong. First of all, the people who went there were not prepared at all. That was why they fell into the trap so easily. Secondly, the method used was wrong. Its true strength might not be that high. If it was an expert who went there, he might be able to fight evenly with the evil dragon. However, this did not mean that the dragon was really that strong. There was no one around the mountain. There were a few villages at the foot of the mountain, but they were all abandoned now. Because of the terrifying existence on the mountain, the people at the foot of the mountain could not continue to live in peace. The experts in those sects were all dead. If these villages continued to exist, wouldn't they be destroyed one day? It was better to leave early. There is indeed a faint dragon chi, but it doesn't feel like an evil dragon with a pure bloodline. It feels more like only a part of the dragon clan's bloodline was awakened. Chapter 856. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. But this aura is a little too mixed. I feel like there are some strange things mixed in with it. The dragon's soul stood at the periphery and felt the faint aura in the air. It got a lot of information from it. However, no matter how pure the bloodline of this evil dragon was, it was undoubtedly powerful. Let's go and see the situation first. The dragon's soul asked them to climb the mountain on foot. However, it was not slow at all. It did not take long for them to reach the middle of the mountain. The scenery here was not bad. However, there was a faint smell of blood everywhere. It was nauseating. Occasionally, they could see some broken limbs and blood clots. However, after a short period of time, they could not tell what those things were. The dragon's soul was disgusted. The scene must have been very tragic. Moreover, if there was really a dragon bloodline left on this mountain, it must be someone with an impure bloodline. Even if the evil dragon loved blood, it would not make its place so messy. From this, it could be determined that the dragon who lived here was not someone with a profound bloodline. It was not certain if the bloodline in his body was pure or not. 2 more little fellows have come. How interesting. I thought that no one would come for a while. Although it's a little weak, at least it's still alive. A gigantic claw that could blot out the sky gradually descended. It was accompanied by a teasing voice. There was a huge rumbling sound on the mountain peak. The mountain rocks slid to the foot of the mountain. Some were here. The people around could not help but tremble in fear as they recalled the scene of the sky falling and the earth cracking. The ground was covered in blood and broken limbs. It seemed like even the clouds in the sky were dyed red. There were quite a few people who managed to escape, but not a single one of them managed to come out of there alive. It was terrifying. I don't know who provoked such a terrifying existence, but I don't think they will live for long. When will the experts of the mysterious heaven sect arrive? With such an evil dragon by our side, I can't help but feel terrified. Who knows? Who knows when the disciples of those big sects will come? The huge smoke slowly dispersed. The evil dragon did not see the bloody scene it wanted to see. Instead, it was empty. There was no one around. It was the same for the surroundings. It was as if the 2 people he saw just now were just an illusion. How is this possible? How is this possible? They were here just now. However, Chinyu had already unhurriedly walked out from under the claw with the dragon's soul. In the eyes of the dragon, capturing the 2 of them was a must. But at the same time, they slowly walked out from the shadows and stood in another place. The dragon's soul after breaking through the immortal realm. Now he could change the flow of time 100 times faster. In other words, what the dragon in the eyes of the dragon was that in the blink of an eye was the time in the dragon could walk. In the eyes the 2 disappeared in the blink of an eye. Was translation unable to find anyone? The evil dragon began to go crazy. He refused to admit that he had seen wrongly just now. There was still some aura left at the original spot. How could he be mistaken? There were 2 people there just now, and there was an extremely delicious smell on their bodies. He was sure that as long as he ate those 2 people, the purity of his bloodline would increase, and he would be able to get rid of the impurities in his bloodline. He would be 1 step closer to becoming a true dragon. The dragon soul's guess was right. This dragon was just the bloodline left behind by a powerful true dragon. However, the bloodline in his body was not that pure. The powerful strength in his bloodline gave him extraordinary strength, but it also reminded him of his weakness at all times. Only when his bloodline became pure could he hope to improve his strength further. Devouring martial artists was a method he had painstakingly begged for. Only with the help of countless fresh blood could he further remove the impurities in his body. However, his strength was not enough. It was too slow to capture them one by one. Later, under the reminder of a certain existence, he created the illusion of a treasure being born. Sure enough, it attracted countless martial artists. After devouring so many lives, his strength improved further. However, the side effects were also very obvious. The aura on his body is too mixed. I guess the bloodline is already mixed with too much fresh blood. What an idiot. The only way to improve his bloodline is to improve his strength over and over again. Every time he improves his strength, there is a certain possibility to remove a small part of the impurities. However, he chose such the stupidest way, using countless lives to forcefully improve his strength and remove the impurities. The former was achieved, but the impurities in his bloodline would become more and more. And for them, there was also a problem that was neither too big nor too small. The bloodline of this evil dragon was not very pure, and its blood essence was probably not very valuable. However, this problem was also very simple to solve. As long as the entire evil dragon was killed, all the part of its dragon bloodline was extracted, and then condensed into a drop of blood essence. The value of this drop of blood essence was already comparable to that of an ordinary dragon's blood essence. Even when I reached such a level, even using such a soul technique could not further corrode the part of the dragon's bloodline that belonged to the dragon race. One could imagine that the power of this bloodline should be extremely majestic. If all of it was extracted, it could be considered to have some value, and it would not be in vain for them to come here. Qin Yu often preferred to use strength to let the dragon race choose whether to submit or not. But now, facing this evil dragon that had swallowed countless people, he did not have such good patience. Dragon soul. Kill. The evil dragon had already sensed that something was wrong, and a faint murderous aura spread around. However, when he turned his head, he did not see anyone anywhere. When he sensed that something was wrong, it was already too late. The most fragile reverse scale was pierced by a spear. It stabbed fiercely into it. Although he did not have the purest dragon bloodline, he still had a part of the extremely powerful bloodline power in his body, so the reverse scale on his body was also his weakness. But until now, he could not figure out how this person suddenly appeared around his weakness. Although he did not die, he was already seriously injured. As the dark green blood slowly flowed, his strength was also slowly declining. If he could not end the battle in a short time, he would undoubtedly die. Qin Yu felt that it was a pity that he could not directly end his life, so much so that it had now become a confrontation posture. However, now it was very clear who was strong and who was weak. Although the evil dragon was able to maintain his last dignity, his strength had severely declined. If he continued to fight like this, the first person who could not hold on would be him. Chapter 857. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Wait. Don't kill me. Don't you want to gain more power? The evil dragon's body was covered in dark green blood. However, his tone was low, as if he was telling a great secret. The huge figure suddenly flew out. He slammed hard on the stone wall, causing the entire mountain peak to shake. It looked like it was going to shatter in the next moment. It's not up to you to tell me what I want to do. Moreover, how do you know that I'm not here to gain more power? He was not that free. Everything he did had a purpose. At this moment, the evil dragon was severely injured. The huge iron chain that could not be hidden was also exposed in front of everyone. The evil dragon had only revealed his upper body. Part of his body had always been hidden under the clouds on the mountain peak. At this moment, his greatest secret had been exposed. He was locked up here. He could not resist at all. As long as he left the range of this mountain, he would no longer be under his control. Damn it! How did I get exposed? Just as he was vexed, an extremely cold voice sounded above his head. Hand over the dragon bloodline in your body, or die. At this moment, the evil dragon was in a very sorry state. Dark green blood kept flowing out of his wounds. His body was also covered in dust. His eyes were red, as if he would explode and hurt someone in the next moment. No. What do you have to make me hand over the dragon bloodline in my body? You're only stronger than me, but it's not absolute. Puff, puff, puff. The dark green blood suddenly turned into a few sharp swords. They attacked from all directions. Qin Yu dodged continuously. However, it was not far from his back. There was still a dark green light that flashed past and hit his back. There was a crisp clang. The evil dragon, who had a smile on his face, suddenly stopped laughing. How is this possible? This was his last trump card. It was unexpected. Countless experts had died under his attack. Even the extremely powerful person who had trapped him in this place had died because he was not prepared for this move. After such a long time, he turned into a pile of bones. Now, the technique that had won every time suddenly lost its effect. Qin Yu had clearly been hit by the attack. However, he was still completely unharmed. If I didn't have the Azure Dragon soft armor, your attack might have succeeded. Did he really not notice that those attacks were just a cover? He was just taking the opportunity to set up a trap and see what other tricks he had up his sleeves. The result was nothing more than that. The dragon's strength was comparable to a profound immortal. However, that was only possible under certain conditions and with the assistance of various items. That was why it could be so simple and easy. In fact, his strength was only at the heavenly immortal realm. A so-called trump card was even slightly inferior to the strength of a heavenly immortal realm expert because it was unexpected. However, if the attack was able to hit a vital point and the target was a defenseless person, that way he would be able to kill her in one strike. When it landed on his body, it was neither painful nor itchy. The heaven-suppressing battle god array appeared. Boundless soul force transformed into several gigantic chains, binding the evil dragon tightly. The dragon's soul unceremoniously went over and stripped all of the dragon bloodline from his body. If he voluntarily gave it up, the injuries he suffered might be less. If he used such a method to forcefully strip it, then he would only be a piece of trash in the future. Although he could still live, he would be inferior to an ordinary person with no strength. In the future, even those ordinary hunters would be able to kill him at will. No, the evil dragon let out an unwilling roar. The wounds on his body opened up again because of such intense movements. However, the powerful dragon bloodline in his body had been completely stripped away, and the blood that flowed out again was only dark red. It even had a faint black color. Those were the impurities that he had absorbed. In the past, he was suppressed by the extremely powerful dragon bloodline. Now that he no longer had the dragon bloodline, he was just a piece of trash. With the heaven-suppressing battle god array, this was the safest place. A piece of trash that had completely lost his strength was no threat to him. Qin Yu found a relatively clean place, sat down cross-legged, and completely refined this wisp of dragon bloodline. When it was condensed into a drop of blood essence, then he officially swallowed and absorbed it. Wisps of faintly discernible immortal qi all gathered on the mountain peak. Gradually, it formed a huge vortex formed by immortal qi, and at the end of the vortex was Qin Yu. Within a radius of 5 kilometers, the immortal qi on the entire mountain peak was absorbed by him. Such a big commotion naturally attracted the attention of everyone in the nearby Cloud Immortal City. Some people thought of the powerful and evil dragon on the peak of the mountain, which had wreaked havoc in an area. Not long ago, he had swallowed the lives of countless people. Could it be that because of the deaths of those people, the evil dragon's strength broke through? He was already so powerful. If he broke through this time, what realm would he reach? The evil dragon could defeat so many mystic immortals, so he should have reached the immortal soul realm. Such a big commotion can't be that he broke through from the immortal soul realm to the immortal soul realm, right? Everyone fell silent. This commotion was too big. If it was not to break through to a higher level, no one would believe it. Previously, someone had broken through to the immortal soul realm. That was a rare sight to see. But at that time, there was no such big commotion. He actually plundered all the immortal qi in the entire mountain. If they knew that this was just a heaven immortal breaking through, perhaps everyone would find it inconceivable. The huge vortex gradually became much smaller, until the last wisp of immortal qi was absorbed into Qin Yu's body. The aura on his body became more condensed and vigorous. The dragon's soul could not help but sit down. Not long after, he also broke through. Once again, it caused the surrounding immortal chi to shake. This once again caused the people in the Cloud Immortal City to be shocked. Could it be that he is breaking through one after another? Although this possibility was very small, looking at the way the immortal chi was shaking, it was indeed so. Qin Yu's breakthrough not only caused the dragon's soul to break through, One-Eyed also obtained a portion of immortal chi because of this. Of course, he only obtained a small portion, but even a small portion was enough to benefit him immensely. Previously, the ancient remote region was so barren. Now he finally arrived at a place full of power. Although he was a little unwilling when he came, he also obtained great benefits because of this. Maybe it's a good choice to follow him. Feeling the fullness of this huge power, One-Eyed could not help but quietly change his mind. He also gradually accepted his identity of being controlled by others. After all, he had obtained great benefits from this and did not suffer any grievances, as he imagined. Chapter 858. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. After series of unforeseen events, the originally nameless mountain now had a name. It was simply called Evil Dragon Mountain because there was an evil dragon in the mountain. Countless streaks of light flashed across the sky. One by one, they landed at the foot of the mountain and looked up at the peak. It was not that they could not go up, but they did not dare to. After all, no one dared to say how powerful that evil dragon was. If all of them rushed up, there might be more fresh corpses on the mountain. They only had one life, and none of them would joke around with their lives. It's not good to keep watching from below. Why don't we go up and take a look? No one said anything. They did not have the guts. While they were hesitating, the ground suddenly shook. However, the evil dragon did not appear as they imagined. They only heard a weak, struggling sound. It was so faint that they could not hear it clearly. It was because of this sound that they finally had the courage to go up and take a look. However, after they got closer, they did not see any evil dragon. They only saw a trash with a mixed bloodline. However, this trash with a mixed bloodline had an extremely strong smell of blood on him. Clearly, this was the evil dragon that had harmed countless people. How is this possible? I saw with my own eyes how powerful this guy was before. The group of people looked at each other in disbelief. They even felt that it was ridiculous. In the blink of an eye, the evil dragon that they thought should have eaten so many people was beaten into a trash. This unforeseen event was really too big, causing all of them to be somewhat unprepared. After Qin Yu broke through, he left with the dragon's soul. There was no longer any energy around the mountain that could be used to absorb. All of it was absorbed by them. If they wanted to consolidate, they had to find a place with abundant immortal chi. The small spiritual land in the city, Lord's Mansion, was the best choice. At this time, the city lord was not here. He should have been attracted by the huge commotion. However, this did not hinder them at all. Whether the city lord was here or not, this place temporarily belonged to them. They could enter and leave freely and use it as they wished. They gradually consolidated their strength until the sky turned dark. At this time, the dense weapons in the spiritual pool had also become much thinner. Of course, this place could absorb the surrounding immortal chi on its own. It wouldn't be long before everything would return to normal, and that would have nothing to do with them. However, after the city lord returned, he recalled the matter of the evil dragon suddenly becoming a cripple. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. If this had been done by a passing expert, it was possible that he would not have received any news. However, he felt that this was not the truth. The real culprit might still be in this city. This was because only a few days had passed since the incident. Even if he was some kind of expert, if he happened to pass by, he would at least have a place to stay. Do you still have any doubts? Didn't they say that a passing expert was doing the people a favor? Lan Feng was extremely excited. He didn't think that there might be something behind this. However, The city lord knew that this matter was not that simple. These words were only said for the people outside to hear. What was the truth? He knew very well in his heart that there was no outsider, no expert. He didn't even know who the culprit was. At the moment, he only had some suspicions. You're just a child. Don't ask so much. Besides, I've already told you that Chi Chuan isn't a good guy. He approached you for his own reasons. Lan Feng, who was originally somewhat happy, immediately pulled a long face. He really treated Chi Chuan as his own brother, so he couldn't bear to hear someone say bad things about his brother. Moreover, Chi Chuan's legs were already crippled. Even if you do have some prejudice against him, he's already completely crippled. He's already like this. What's the point of saying all this? The city lord knew that he couldn't persuade his youngest son. Thus, he could only sigh helplessly and give up on trying to persuade him. He couldn't do anything about his youngest son. Moreover, he was currently wondering who the person who hadn't shown himself was. If an expert suddenly arrived, no matter how well they hid their tracks, they would still reveal something unusual. Thinking about it, nothing out of the ordinary had happened in Cloud Immortal City recently. Speaking of which, it seemed that there were only those two people. Hiss, if it really was those two people. Perhaps he had unintentionally done something big. The city lord thought of a possibility and hurriedly ran over to Small Spirit Land. He didn't even care about Lan Feng. He left his youngest son behind in a hurry, only to see two people who had already broken through in terms of strength. Indeed, they had broken through. They had only gone out for a short while, and they had broken through when they returned. Moreover, the timing was quite similar. The city lord's mind was in a mess, so much so that it felt like the world was falling apart. If it weren't for the fact that one day someone told him that a sky immortal could actually defeat an evil dragon that had devoured countless Shen immortals, he would have smiled. Then, without hesitation, he would have chased that person out. What a joke! Who didn't know how big the gap between realms was? Not to mention the gap between realms. Even the gap between realms was huge. It was almost impossible to cross that gap. Only a small number of geniuses could fight across realms. However, in this world, there were people who could fight across realms. As the city lord of a small cloud immortal city, he had never heard of or seen such a person. It really was you. I didn't dare to believe it at first, but you've both broken through. In an instant, the city lord's mind turned several times. The smile on his face was quite amiable and kind. If he could control such a genius, even if it was just to pull him in when he did something in the future, it would be excellent. When Qin Yu saw the city lord again and saw the colorful expression on his face, he understood. Why did he come? However, he just tacitly agreed to this matter. City lord, did you come because of the evil dragon? Don't worry. The evil dragon has now become a piece of trash and can no longer affect the city lord's cloud immortal city. For a moment, the city lord's guess was confirmed. He felt both touched and complicated. He was touched that Qin Yu could think of him at such a time. However, because he had eyes but failed to see, he almost missed a peerless genius and felt regretful. He couldn't help but sigh from the bottom of his heart. If Qin Yu had been in the immortal world at the beginning, compared to his current age, he should have reached a higher level. Chapter 859. The immortal soul seemed to be within reach. However, that was also a level that he needed to look up to. The city lord's strength was only at the late stage of the mystic immortal realm. City lord, is there anything else? If not, I will rest with the dragon soul. Qin Yu unceremoniously wanted to send the guest away. Even if he was staying in the city lord's mansion, it was as if he was the owner here. The few present didn't think there was a problem with that. First of all, this was Qin Yu's place. Naturally, he could do whatever he wanted. Moreover, powerhouses and geniuses would always receive some preferential treatment. This was understandable. Then that's fine. If there's anything you need, just let me know. If there's something you can't find for the time being, you can also tell Steward Liu. If I can do it, I will try my best to satisfy you. The city lord's goodwill was very obvious. There was even a hint of caution in his tone. Originally, with his strength, he didn't need to do this. However, now that he had encountered some trouble, he needed extremely powerful geniuses. Although the other realms were slightly weaker now, they couldn't even reach the threshold. However, he was very confident. According to the speed of his breakthrough, Qin Yu and the Dragon Soul would definitely be able to reach the most basic requirements in a short period of time. He could be considered to have solved a big problem in his heart. However, he still had to carefully support him now, in case he was unhappy and left. Such an obvious attitude. If he didn't have other intentions, who would believe it? Group leader, don't worry. I remember the contract between us clearly. No matter what I get from you, I will return it 100 times. There were two meanings in this sentence. The first was to remind them of the existence of the contract between them. He had no obligation to do things outside the contract, and within the scope of the contract, the city lord did have to help him as much as possible. The second was a deeper meaning. No matter what the city lord gave him, he would return it 100 times, whether it was good or bad. Moreover, this was also recognized by the contract. Between the two of them, one had to give and the other had to give. Therefore, there was a great restriction between them. No one could not disobey the rules. Otherwise, it would be courting death. I know this, I know. However, there's no need to be too demanding. Perhaps you've already noticed that I'm currently facing a very troublesome situation. Our Cloud Immortal City still lacks a representative for the once-in-a-century exchange. There was an accident earlier. Everyone who was able to go was more or less injured. Therefore, he urgently needed someone who could represent Yuanqing to participate in this exchange. As long as he could survive this time, he might be able to nurture another person who could participate in the exchange 100 years later. But this time it was right in front of him. It was true that he didn't have anyone on hand, so he could only reluctantly invite someone to help him. Not to mention how much money he had to spend in between. The people he hired from outside would never be of the same mind as him. If he was bribed again, his Cloud Immortal City would lose a lot of face. He just wanted to show a bit of his power to see whether or not Qin Yu could replace him in going there. If this matter was feasible, then he would naturally be extremely grateful and would even be able to offer a generous reward. In any case, if he were to hire someone from the outside, he would have to pay a huge price. It was better to hire someone he could trust more easily. If it didn't work, he wouldn't plead guilty. After all, this was his own choice. However, his attitude might be a little cold. He wasn't an overbearing person, so he would naturally follow the agreement. You said that there will be many people there, and even the Xiantian sect will be there. The city lord saw hope from this sentence. Originally, when he was talking, Qin Yu wasn't interested at all. But as soon as the Xiantian sect was mentioned, his interest was piqued. The city lord didn't hesitate to tell him who would be attending the exchange this time. The Xiantian sect was the most important thing he introduced. The current sect master's eldest disciple, Jiang Lingzhou. There should be a few elders' disciples, but I don't know the exact candidates yet. But according to the situation of the previous exchange, there should be 5 to 6 people there. Their strength should be at least above the mystic immortal realm, because the threshold to enter is the mystic immortal realm. Of course, that was what he said. In fact, many immortal souls would be there. In fact, the host would definitely be at the immortal spirit realm. His Cloud Immortal City was just a small city. Excluding him, there were too few people who could really handle the situation. In the past, he had to send immortal souls. Because immortals really couldn't be brought out, they might be defeated the moment they appeared. But now, Qin Yu was his hope, because the rest were extremely rare people who could fight across a realm. As long as he could raise his strength to the mystic immortal realm in a short period of time, he would more or less be able to match half an immortal soul. To him, this was already the best result. He didn't dare to dream of anything higher. Of course, this is outside the contract. It's an extra reward for you. It's definitely not a loan from me, so there's no need to return 100 times. What do you think about this matter? Do you want to consider it? The city lord had already tried his best to lower his status. He was willing to offer the best resources. Anyway, as long as it was his goal, it was better than taking a huge risk to invite people from outside. I agree to this matter, but there's one thing. Qin Yu's request was something to be expected. The city lord was also seriously listening to him, but what he heard made his eyes pop out. He actually rejected such a good offer. He could participate in the exchange, but he didn't want his conditions. It was the first time he met someone who only did things for no reward. In the immortal realm, there were many people who would do anything for resources. Murder, arson, and disregard the rules. He had seen all of them, but he had never seen someone like this. He definitely put forward these conditions with sincerity, without any dissatisfaction. He even dared to swear to the heavens, and even dared to make another contract to ensure that what he said was true. It's not that I don't believe you, but I want to know everything about the Mystic Heaven sect. Tell me everything you know, and it'll be my reward. Of course, during this period, the city lord also paid him a lot of resources. Mainly, he needed some information. It would be best if it was related to the whereabouts of the Dragon Clan. And these city lords could do it. Chapter 860. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The dragon race had always been a powerful existence. Even in the immortal realm, the appearance of the dragon race would become news that everyone paid attention to. Of course, no one paid much attention to existences like the dragon race. That was because their bloodline was too impure and had no value. Their strength was only average, unlike the powerful dragon race. Some could even call themselves gods. They ruled over a region. Currently, I know of many places where the dragon race appears. However, these places are extremely dangerous. If you go, I'm afraid you won't be able to return in a short period of time. The exchange will begin in 3 months, so you might spend a month on the road. The key was that it was too dangerous. Every place where the Dragon Clan might appear was an extremely dangerous and resource-rich place. However, there were countless forces entrenched in such places. He was only a small city lord and did not have much power. In Cloud Immortal City, he could cover the sky with one hand. But when it came to other places, it couldn't be used at all. At most, he could only know a few people. Or he could use money. That way, he might be able to create a path. However, there was no guarantee that he would be able to return safely. If he went to a dangerous place, he would most likely encounter danger. Only with danger can there be opportunities. I want to break through to the mystic immortal realm in a short period of time. Although it is not impossible, you know how difficult it is. No matter how outstanding his talent was, it was impossible for him to break through after being locked in the same place for a period of time without moving. Therefore, he had to go out and move around. If he forcefully used all kinds of resources to accumulate strength, it would only be troublesome for him. It might cause his foundation to be unstable. However, he had always disdained to forcefully use resources to increase his strength. Usually, success would follow naturally. Even if he used a large amount of resources, it was because he only lacked enough resources to accumulate strength. The city lord knew that he could not trap him. Qin Yu had already made up his mind. Since he had already made up his mind, it was not something that the city lord could change. All right then, you can go. However, I still hope that you can take this. This is already the strongest martial technique that I have mastered. It also comes with a soul-breaking sword. I heard that it has slain a dragon before. However, it has been a very, very long time since anyone was able to pull out this sword. This was already the city lord's most prized treasure, which had been passed down from generation to generation. However, when it came to his generation, only some legends remained. No one was able to pull out that sword, and no one was able to learn the martial arts. Therefore, it became a piece of trash and could only be placed on a bookshelf as a collection. Anything more would be of no use. The name of the skill was Dragon Slaying Chant. The sword was also taken out by the city lord. Qin Yu placed his hand on it and felt a slight tremor. It was as if the sword had also sensed the aura on his body, so it was restless. This sword had a spirit, and its strength was extraordinary. Although it had been trapped by the scabbard and had been sealed for 1,000 years, its spirituality had not diminished. Good sword! His eyes lit up. He could faintly feel that this sword seemed to want to tell him something. Perhaps this was fate. When he held this sword, he knew that he would definitely be able to open it. And that was indeed the case. He was able to break open the sword without breaking a sweat. The treasured sword was unsheathed. There was a crisp, buzzing sound, as if it was also jumping with joy. The city lord looked at this scene in disbelief. Suddenly he sighed. It was indeed a treasured sword. He could feel the sharpness of the sword from so far away. But since he had already said so, he wouldn't easily regret it either. Not to mention that he had tried countless times. It was not that he had not let other people try, but only such a person could pull out this sword. Perhaps this was fate. Even if he was envious, he could not replace it. It was better to be generous. In that case, he might still choose to be broad-minded, and he did not care about trifles. He wanted to leave a good impression on Qin Yu. Such a treasured sword is indeed not bad, but the name soul-breaking sword is somewhat inappropriate. Qin Yu himself felt it the most clearly. The reason why this sword was pulled out so easily by him was that it felt the dragon blood on his body. It was indeed a good sword, but its murderous nature was very strong, and it was quite interested in the dragon blood. It was only interested in the dragon blood. The martial skill is called dragon slaying. Then it will be called drinking dragon sword. Only this name, in his opinion, was the most suitable. If it was changed to another name, it would not be as suitable as it was now. Soul breaking, this name was really not in line with the characteristics of the sword. The city lord's eyes lit up, and he also felt that this was a good name. Since he had already given it away, he did not care about changing the name. Moreover, since this sword had a spirit and had recognized its master, Qin Yu's safety could be guaranteed, and he did not have to worry so much anymore. At most, he was worried that someone would set their eyes on this treasured sword and have the intention of killing it to further their misfortune. However, when he thought of his own strength, the worry in his heart quickly disappeared. In the end, Qin Yu refused the city lord's offer to send someone to send him. He could go by himself. What he lacked was only information. What he needed most was a map. He also needed someone to give him a brief explanation of the situation outside. I know you want to look for a dragon. Currently, there are only a few places with dragons. The city lord was referring to the dragon shrine, the giant dragon valley, and the most mysterious 1,000 caves, demonic forest. There were indeed dragons in these places, but they were all extremely dangerous. Every place had many dangers. There were many guards in the dragon shrine, and there were many traps and dangers in the giant dragon valley. Although the last place was not as dangerous as it seemed, it was also the most mysterious. Very few people who went in came back alive, and those who came back alive all went crazy in the end. In the end, they were no different from half dead. Therefore, this was an absolutely dangerous place. The city lord had specially marked this place with a special mark. Don't go there, because of the previous example of the evil dragon. This time, the city lord was even more worried that Qin Yu would run there. He was not worried about the other places. Only this place was the most dangerous place. After going in, there was basically no possibility of coming back alive. Qin Yu just looked at that place and did not speak. In his opinion, the most mysterious place was the easiest place to enter. Chapter 861. Compared to other places, there were more or less obvious dangers. Only this place was the most mysterious. Seeing his expression, the city lord more or less had an idea. Not only did his words not serve as a reminder, it even had the opposite effect. His heart instantly turned cold. You promised me. You can't go back on your words. Of course, since I've already promised you, I'll definitely participate in the exchange. But when he went, and what he had to do before he went, it was not something the city lord could control. His kind reminder was useless. The city lord was also helpless. He only thought that after Chinyu went in and encountered danger, he would understand his painstaking efforts. That kind of place was actually something that they could enter and leave as they wished. It's a bit far there, take these things. It can be considered as your travel expenses. I can't send anyone to follow you, so I can only take them here. Qin Yu thanked him. He could indeed use these things, although they were not very useful to him. It was also not that he could not afford to spend this amount of money. But after all, it was out of good intentions. Not to mention taking things out one by one. It was too conspicuous and troublesome to look at. The Cloud Immortal City's city lord found a cloud boat for them to make it convenient for Chinyu to travel. Now I'm wondering if I should stay for 2 more days after all. It's safer to make more preparations. There's also training. If there's anything you need, you can tell me at any time. There was not enough time to travel now. Of course. Qin Yu decisively rejected. Now that his realm was very stable, it was better to leave as soon as possible. It was not difficult to advance to the Xian immortal realm within 3 months. But this trip was really a waste of time. Even with the cloud boat, it would still take a long time to travel. If he did not hurry, he would still be tight on time. He just said goodbye to Lulu before he left. After all, they were acquaintances. The cloud boat kept shuttling through the clouds. Its speed was extremely fast. Although it was not as fast as Chinyu and the Dragon Soul, the cloud boat could keep moving forward. Even if they were to rest, they could continue to move forward according to their initial position. There was no harm in not having any rest in between. There was also a lot of food and utensils on the cloud boat. Qin Yu was more interested in the 1,000 deep demonic forest. However, the giant Dragon Valley was the closest to the Cloud Immortal City. He decided to go there and take a look. As for the 2 days on the ship, he was temporarily familiarizing himself with dragon chant and drinking dragon sword. The ancestor of the Cloud Mountain city lord might have possessed extraordinary strength and might even have dominated a region. The combined power of these 2 items was quite impressive. If an extremely talented person were to obtain these items, they would be able to borrow the power of these 2 items to forcefully fight across realms. Of course, it was somewhat impossible to cross a major realm. It depended on the individual's strength. Master, let me take a look. The dragon's soul looked on enviously from the side. The sword looked too beautiful. Previously, when it was covered in dust, it looked dusty. But when the sword was pulled out, the dust on it became lighter and lighter. Now that it was shining with silver light, it looked extraordinarily mighty. Qin Yu tossed the sword in his hand to the side, and the dragon's soul easily caught it. With a look of joy, it prepared to pull it out and give it a try. But just as he was about to pull it out, his face froze. The dragon's soul didn't believe it and tried a few more times. But no matter how much strength it used, it couldn't pull the sword out. It seems that this sword really recognizes its master. His thoughts of trying it out were completely shattered. This sword didn't recognize him and wasn't willing to let him touch it. It only recognized Qin Yu. The drowsy one-eyed man who was lying on the cloud boat suddenly shuddered. He suddenly got up and looked at the void in the clouds, shouting that something was wrong. The drinking dragon sword returned to Qin Yu's hand. He picked it up and looked at it briefly before pulling it out. This sword is used like this. Watch carefully. A silver light soared into the sky and slashed towards the void. Layers of thick clouds were split in half. A deep mark was left in the middle, revealing a figure that was hidden behind it. The white dragon couldn't dodge in time and directly collided with the silver light. A wound so deep that bones could be seen appeared on his body. Drops of blood fell to the ground. The white dragon let out a painful howl. It almost thought that it was going to die here. That silver light just now seemed to want to split its entire dragon in half. Even if it pulled back part of its strength at the last moment, half of its body was already crippled. The one-eyed man opened his mouth. The words that he was about to say had been swallowed back down his throat. There was no need to say it out loud. He was of no use at all. Qin, you casually waved a silver light and knocked down the enemy hidden in the dark. It was even a bit late when he realized it. He patted his head in frustration. It seems that I still have to be alert at all times in the future. Even on the cloud boat, I can't let my guard down. Otherwise, what can I do? Having a master that was too powerful was sometimes a kind of trouble, because this pet of his with special strength didn't have room to display its strength, and he wasn't willing to be lazy and not do anything. That would make him seem too useless. Next time, you can remind me in advance. Qin, you clearly didn't look at the one-eyed man, but this sentence was said to him. The seriously injured white dragon had stopped struggling. The huge wound on his body was still bleeding, but the color of the blood was no longer as bright as before. Not long after, the white dragon woke up again and was already on the cloud boat. With the white dragon's huge body, this small cloud boat almost couldn't fit them. In the end, the entire cloud boat was filled to the brim, leaving almost no space. On its body, there was a huge wound that had already scabbed over. But because of excessive blood loss, the white dragon felt that its strength had declined greatly. Before, it had no way to fight against the couple at all. Now that it was seriously injured, it had no strength to resist. Submit or die, you can choose one of them. In the current state of the white dragon, it had no choice at all. Not to mention that it was extremely weak now. Even if it wasn't so weak before, it might not have been able to escape. But the white dragon was still a dragon with a relatively pure bloodline and had its own self-esteem. I won't submit. If you kill me, you will offend the entire Dragon Valley. Dragon Valley? Coincidentally, he was going to that place now. It seemed that the news that there was a dragon there was true, and there was definitely more than one dragon. Chapter 862. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Both sides confronted each other. White Dragon's huge head was even slightly taller than Chinyu's. There was only pride in his azure blue eyes. There was no trace of panic or fear in the face of death. Coincidentally, I'm going to the giant Dragon Valley. Why don't we go together? The pride in White Dragon's eyes had not faded. Hearing this, he was slightly startled. How dare you go and bring me along? Aren't you afraid that I'll leave you there forever? He had some status in the giant Dragon Valley, although this matter was indeed that he should not have spied on Chinyu in the first place. But since he was injured, the Dragon Clan had always been protective and would not talk about who was right and who was wrong in this matter. Leave him there forever? That would require the Dragon Clan in the giant Dragon Valley to be able to do so. Then I'll wait and see. I hope that you won't disappoint me. Give me the essence blood. White Dragon still had not reacted, but the dragon soul had already begun to punch him. For a dragon that was already seriously injured, there was no need to be so flashy. It was very easy to make him obedient. Just beat him until he was half dead. At this time, White Dragon was itching to know what Chinyu wanted to do. When he heard the last sentence, he received another round of beatings. He almost could not help but give in directly, but in the end, when he saw the realm of the two clearly, he became arrogant again. White Dragon only had 3 words. No. Ken. Such an arrogant attitude, of course, received the dragon soul's kind hospitality. Later, the originally handsome White Dragon had almost no skin and flesh on his body. There was a huge difference between his previous awe-inspiring appearance and his current appearance. If he was said to be awe-inspiring before, now he looked like a big pile of rotten meat. At this time, he was already exhaling more than he was inhaling. The dragon's soul was very measured. It would beat him until he was half dead, but it would also hang on to his last breath so that he would not die. Looking at the dragon's soul, raising its fist again, White Dragon shuddered. I submit. I'm really willing to submit. Don't you want the essence blood? How much do you want? The dragon's soul withdrew its hand in a slightly regretful manner. This white dragon felt pretty good when he fought it. It was a pity that he was so spineless that he agreed so quickly. He still had many tricks up his sleeve that he hadn't used yet. He thought about how he had been beaten up so badly that he didn't even have the chance to speak. Bai Long shook his head again and again. He was afraid that they would go back on their word, so he immediately forced out a drop of essence blood. All right, don't hit him so hard. Qin Yu suppressed the dragon soul. Now that the white dragon was beaten to such a miserable state, it was enough. If he were to strike again, he might not be able to survive. Since he had already chosen to submit, he was one of them. There was no need to be so heavy-handed. There are still many dragons in the giant dragon valley, enough for you to slowly practice. Soon, the white dragon disappeared. He didn't hear this sentence either. If they heard it, they would probably feel that they had let down their family and friends in the Dragon Valley. Only when the dragon's soul realized this point did it calm down a lot. They had already met the dragons of the giant Dragon Valley here. Of course, it wasn't far from there. It could even be said that it was very close. Not long after the white dragon chose to submit, they had already arrived at the place. The giant Dragon Valley was a mountain that was surrounded by several mountains. One could vaguely see that there were many huge spaces in the mountains. There were also traces of the dragon clan around, but they couldn't see a single dragon. Qin Yu released the white dragon again. Seeing the familiar place that he had lived in for many years, the white dragon was extremely excited. He thought that after taking out the essence blood, he would be weak for a while. Who knew that he wouldn't be weak for long? He even found a dragon vein. That was a dragon vein. Under the nourishment of the dragon vein, not to mention the price of a drop of essence blood, even if he took out a few more drops of essence blood, he wouldn't have to worry at all. So now, not only did he recover to his best state, he also gained a lot of benefits from it. A pair of azure blue pupils seemed to be a little deeper in color, but it was a sign of a pure bloodline. Roar! The white dragon let out a cheerful roar. In the originally empty valley, a few white dragons suddenly appeared. As if responding, they let out roars one after another. Suddenly, they noticed the aura of a stranger. What's going on, Along? You actually brought back a stranger. He doesn't look very strong. Is he a little pet that you went out to catch before? Wow, this human looks pretty good. Don't you feel threatened by this human? I feel the aura of my kind. Long swung his tail. Now, all the injuries on his body had been healed. He looked like another handsome and extraordinary little white dragon. At present, he had already gained great benefits from it, so he raised his head without hesitation. He proudly introduced his master to his companions. The dragons were in an uproar. The dragon clan had always been the most arrogant. They rarely chose to submit to someone. Even if they were forced into a desperate situation, they often wouldn't make such a choice and would rather die. But Along, who had always been the most unruly among them, he actually chose to submit to a human. There was even a dragon that came over and slapped Along's tail in public. Are you stupid? Why did you suddenly choose to be a pet in the hands of a human? From now on, our freedom is no longer in our hands. That's right, what was he thinking? In the end, Along couldn't bear it anymore. Although he was severely taught a lesson, he also realized the strength of Qin Yu and the dragon soul. What's more, he gained great benefits from it later. That was the dragon vein, and no dragon wouldn't covet the dragon vein. The dragon vein was the crystallization of the entire dragon clan, and it was the most important thing. No matter how strong they were, they would still go crazy for the dragon vein. Master has a dragon vein, and it's very powerful. Stop chattering here. I'll ask you one thing. Will you submit or die? Qin Yu was watching from the side. Hearing those words, he shook his head. This white dragon, called Along, was still too young to understand these things. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so stupid to say such a thing. Before, he said this sentence only because he had the absolute strength to crush Arlong. Now, Along didn't have enough strength to face this large group of dragons. He didn't let them realize their strength first. He just said what they had. Sure enough, as he expected, all the dragons went crazy after hearing about the dragon vein. Of course, they didn't choose to submit as Along thought, and each of them looked at the outsider with bad intentions. Chapter 863. That was the dragon vein that all the dragons coveted. If he didn't display his powerful strength in advance and achieve the goal of intimidating the other party, he wouldn't be able to do so. It would only attract covetous eyes. But obviously, Aaron didn't understand this. He was still talking about all kinds of benefits and high spirits, but he didn't notice that the eyes of his familiar companions had begun to change. Qin Yu slowly grasped the sword in his hand. He was ready to face an attack at any time. Right now, the atmosphere was so arrogant and despotic. No matter how stupid Along was, he could tell that something was wrong. However, it was already a little too late to realize that something was wrong. What are you doing? Now that I serve him as my master, going against him is the same as going against me. Go to the side and stay there. This is none of your business. It's been a long time since Along's incident happened here. The dragon that Qin Yu was most comfortable with was the largest dragon in the middle of the mountains. It also looked a little older. If he guessed correctly, it should be the clan leader or something like that. This person was the key. As long as he did not move, the other dragons would not dare to move. Su had already lived for a very, very long time. He had always led his own clansmen to occupy this small valley, living a carefree life. Often, some people would barge in, and he would use some methods to deal with them. Over time, no one would enter this place by mistake. If they weren't strong enough, they wouldn't even have the capital to negotiate with them. Their lives had always been quiet and peaceful. I'm not interested in the dragon vein you have. I can let you go, but Along must stay. I don't care what your goal is. But at least he's my clansman. We don't fight with the world here, and we've never done anything that would anger the heavens and the people. This group of white dragons was just a little greedy, but that was the nature of dragons. In fact, he was still a little ignorant. Only Su had some experience in dealing with people. Although he was not at ease, he was still polite and considerate. However, the coldness, alienation, and the vigilance hidden under the calmness would not relax in the slightest just because he wanted to negotiate. Su just felt a dangerous aura from Qin Yu, so he didn't want to cause trouble. However, Qin Yu had originally come for them. Now that he had found them, he would not leave so easily, so he stood there motionless. That's exactly what I'm here for. That's why I won't leave so easily unless I get what I want. A bad premonition arose in Su's heart. Sure enough, he heard the words blood essence. This was the foundation of their survival. Even if they only took out 1 or 2 drops, it would be a huge loss to them. In fact, he wouldn't even be able to recover his vitality in a short period of time. Impossible. You should know that our blood essence contains our powerful strength. In fact, it's the foundation that allows us to survive and possess such powerful strength. If they really took it out, their vitality would be greatly damaged. Qin Yu and the dragon soul were merely 2 people. They were also carrying a strange little fellow. He didn't think that he couldn't win. In addition, this person actually had a dragon vein in his hands. Su couldn't help but feel a little angry. He had a thought. If they surrounded and killed this person, they might be able to obtain great benefits for free. This was a gift that came knocking on their door. When the time came, no matter what identity Qin Yu had, it wouldn't be counted as their dragon valley. Not to mention the strength of the other dragons, just this Su alone. His strength had already reached the immortal soul. In fact, he was only a step away from becoming an immortal. If he wanted to make a move, Qin Yu might really suffer a small loss. However, the premise was that they really had to make a move. Qin Yu's purpose this time was not to beat all the dragons into submission. More importantly, he wanted to find a place where the dragons lived and make a deal with them. What he wanted was the blood essence of the dragons. The stronger the master of the blood essence was, the better. He also had a lot of things in his hands that he could use to exchange. Su thought about it very seriously for a long time and finally chose to agree. Perhaps it was because he was old. In short, he didn't want to see any war. Since they could negotiate peacefully at the moment, it was very good for both sides. Qin Yu prepared a secret medicine for them that could further improve their dragon bloodline. The reward was the blood essence of the dragons. How can you guarantee that you won't make a move when we are weak? That's right. This person is an outsider, and he even tricked along the way. Why don't you think about it again? This is blood essence. Su listened to the chatter of his clansmen. Without saying a word, he immediately forced out a drop of blood essence from his body. As soon as this drop of dragon blood that was as translucent as a gem came out, all the white dragons shut their mouths because they knew that there was no room for negotiation in this matter. Although Su was very easy to talk to most of the time, but if he really made a decision, then he wouldn't change it and he wouldn't be influenced by others. The first deal was completed. As the master of the blood essence, Su swallowed the medicine first. Suddenly his body fell straight to the ground, smashing a deep pit in the ground. However, his body was still stiff as if he was poisoned. The dragons were in an uproar. First, someone went up to check, but no matter what, there was no way to wake him up. All the spearheads were pointed at Qin Yu and the dragon's soul. Even Along was a little flustered. In his opinion, this really didn't make sense. How could Qin Yu secretly harm the patriarch? They were the most aloof from worldly affairs. Moreover, the patriarch had always brought them here to live in seclusion. He had never had the intention to harm anyone. Don't be so anxious. Why don't you wait a little longer? Being stared at by so many existences that were far stronger than him, Qin Yu was still quite leisurely. He even casually found a relatively flat stone. Sitting on the flat stone, he looked at the pairs of eyes that were bigger than a human head. At this time, there were many emotions in those pairs of eyes. Some were angry, some were anxious. Some even revealed a trace of killing intent. Su had led them to live here for a long time, and everyone was quite respectful to him. This affection was also very deep, and no one had ever thought of taking his place. As long as he was there, the dragons would be able to find their backbone. But now that this backbone had collapsed, all of them were extremely flustered. I proposed to kill him. Avenge Su. One of the dragon's eyes were red. He stared fiercely at Qin Yu, wishing he could eat his flesh and drink his blood. However, at this moment, there was a sudden commotion at the place where Su fell. Chapter 864. The sky fell and the earth cracked. A crisp dragon roar resounded through the sky. A silver dragon that was hundreds of feet long broke through the sky. The aura around him was very familiar to them, but his appearance had changed greatly. Su had refined his bloodline further and upgraded his white armor. The entire dragon had been upgraded from a white dragon to a silver dragon. Although it was only a faint silver light, it was still very different from a white dragon. Oh my God, this is actually real. It can actually improve bloodline. Did you notice that Su didn't have a period of weakness? The most important reason why they didn't want to take out their essence blood for exchange was that there would be a long period of weakness after taking it out. This was very dangerous for them, and it might even cause irreversible injuries. But now there was a very prestigious dragon who used himself to prove to them that this trade was not only not harmful to them, but also extremely beneficial to them. The two dragons who were the most extreme were already stunned. One by one, they found a place to hide in shame. At the same time, they were also very envious and yearning. If they could further improve their bloodline without any side effects. So what if it was essence blood? Not to mention their guilt and yearning. Even Long couldn't help but feel a little jealous. He also handed over his essence blood, but he didn't receive such good treatment. Although it wasn't too difficult to improve one's bloodline and remove the impurities in one's bloodline, often by staying next to the dragon vein. But in the end, it wasn't as impressive as it looked. At least the latter would take a longer time than the former, and it wouldn't achieve immediate results. Su even felt energized after the upgrade. He didn't feel as weak as he imagined. Instead, he was full of energy. He was already an old dragon. Logically speaking, he shouldn't have so much energy, but now he seemed to have returned to his youth. The silver dragon that was hundreds of feet long soared in the sky, constantly venting his joy and excess energy. I really don't know how to thank you. If you didn't come, I wouldn't have such a great opportunity. From now on, my White Dragon clan will be on good terms with you. I owe you a favor. After Su finished speaking, the group of dragons behind him squeezed and rushed over impatiently. They all wanted to get that good thing as soon as possible. This was very effective in increasing their strength. No dragon could resist such a powerful force. Not only could he not refuse, he even yearned for it. Give it to me, give it to me. Why don't you give it to me first? I can exchange it with more blood essence. Are you crazy? If you don't want to make a deal, please step aside. We're all waiting anxiously here. Don't. I can take out more essence blood too. One by one, they squeezed until they broke their heads. As they squeezed and squeezed, they got really angry and started fighting on the spot. It was all to see who would be first and who would be last. Originally, it shouldn't have been so chaotic, but everyone knew that there wouldn't be too many of such treasures. If anyone could snatch the position in front, wouldn't they be able to obtain the treasures to further increase their strength? That was a secret medicine that could purify one's bloodline. Which dragon wouldn't want to own it? If the evil dragon in the past had known of such a thing, he would not have taken the risk. Bloodline was the most important thing to the dragon clan. It was even more important than their lives. Wasn't it just blood essence? With so many dragons here, he could just ask for as many as he wanted. However, Qin Yu was not insatiably greedy and really asked for a higher price. Since he had set the price, a drop of blood essence in exchange for a secret medicine that could be used to purify one's bloodline. In that case, the price would not rise, at least not in this transaction. It's useless to have too much. I'm here to make a deal with you, not to take your lives. If I take out too much essence blood, it will also be very harmful to you. Qin Yu's attitude towards most of the dragons could be said to be quite good. However, there were 2 dragons in this giant dragon valley that were not welcomed. Whether it was their own clan or Qin Yu, they were ostracized. These 2 dragons were the extreme ones. They were the ones who had threatened to kill Qin Yu earlier. Now that they had reacted, they regretted it so much that their intestines were about to turn green. However, there was no other way. Whether it was their own clan or Qin Yu's side, there was no place for them to stay. After Su's bloodline was upgraded, he had nowhere to vent his excess energy, so he directly soared to the 9th heaven and caused a huge commotion. No matter how far away people were standing, they could see a faintly discernible silver light flashing by over there. Strong powerhouses could see the essence and truth through the layers of clouds and mist. Brother Gaolin, should we go and take a look? There seems to be some movement over at the giant Dragon Valley. I don't know how many years it has been since there was such a big movement. Why don't you and I go together? The 2 talked as they walked. It seemed slow, but in the blink of an eye, they arrived at the giant Dragon Valley. The movement here had gradually quieted down. Of course, the 2 of them could not see anything. The places that they could see were the places that the dragons were willing to let them see. Long himself had taken the initiative to surrender. Of course, these things did not belong to him. In the end, after watching the bloodline upgrade one by one, he was the only one left who was still a pure white dragon. The more he looked, the more uncomfortable he felt in his heart. Without saying a word, he ran to other places and wandered around. Who knew that as he wandered around, he found 2 people pointing at him. There's a little dragon over there. It seems that its strength and talent are also extremely good. It seems that Brother Gaolin has taken a fancy to this little dragon. Well, you and I can join hands to take it down. It's good to have it as a pet. Who doesn't want a dragon as their pet? But there are too few people in this world who can do this. Obviously, Brother Gao Lin is not that majority. I'll congratulate you here in advance. Ah Along was not old, and his temperament was relatively simple. But it was not that he did not know anything. There were always some people who broke into the giant Dragon Valley for all kinds of benefits. There were also many who wanted to catch them and sell them. There were also people who thought that they were strong and wanted to catch them as pets. But he really did not care about the strength of these two people. He, all along, was now a dragon with a master. He was not a dragon that anyone could bully at will. The vast majority of the white dragons had evolved into silver dragons. There were only two left who had not evolved into silver dragons. They were the two who were the most active before. Qin, you would not argue with them. After all, it was human nature before. But it was impossible for him to be magnanimous and repay evil with good. If he repaid evil with good, then how would he repay good? Chapter 865. He was not a philanthropist and would not do such a thing that damaged his own interests to bring benefits to others. Su could not help but sigh slightly. He wanted to persuade him, but in the end, he did not know how to persuade him. Suddenly his mind moved. There seems to be a fight over there. Why do I feel that something has happened to Along? No, I have to go over immediately and see who is so bold that they dare to trespass into the Dragon Valley. At this time he also reacted. He was afraid that after he upgraded his bloodline, he caused a big commotion and attracted some people with bad intentions. Perhaps most people were just standing on the periphery to inquire. But if there were enough people, it was inevitable that some people would come directly to him. To him, it was a problem that was neither too big nor too small. One-Eyed used his very strange-looking eye. He glanced in the direction of the movement. In that huge pupil, everything seemed to be gradually fading away, leaving only Along's figure and the two people beside Along who could not be noticed if one did not pay attention. Nothing big, just two people who don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Although it seemed that his bloodline did not evolve into a silver dragon, but Along's own strength was not bad. In addition, he was nourished by the dragon vein. Coupled with the advantages of the dragon clan, ordinary people would definitely not be able to gain any advantage from him. Su could only feel the movement of a large animal in the distance, and could judge that it was two strangers and Along. But there was no way to see it so clearly. After all, there were layers of clouds and mist. Only those with extremely high strength would not be hindered by the clouds and mist. At that time, he chose the Dragon Valley as his habitat because it was hidden and difficult for others to see through. Who would have thought that this one-eyed monster that never spoke would suddenly appear in front of them? He could see all of this so clearly, especially after arriving at the place. Su found that what One-Eyed said was not wrong at all. But to say that he was strong was not necessarily the case. He saw the strength of that little guy very clearly. He was not even a celestial immortal, and the aura on his body did not seem like that of a martial Tao cultivator. Could it be that he was a relatively special existence? He himself could not tell what kind of existence One-Eyed was, but he also knew how rare this kind of existence was. Wei Shi's ability to see through the void was a little too powerful. If he knew that his single eye could not see through the void, but could see through reality, all illusions would seem to be non-existent in his eyes. They would probably be even more shocked because this ability was already heaven-defying. This was because the biggest characteristic of the one-eyed eye was that it would not be restricted by the realm and strength. In other words, even Senzin could set up an illusion that no one dared to break through. For One-Eyed, it was an existence that he could destroy with a wave of his hand. He could even enter it and spin it around 300 to 500 times. This was the most terrifying thing about him. But so far, he hadn't met anyone with an extremely high cultivation base. However, no one had ever discovered this. Or rather, he didn't really care. So what if One-Eyed's strength and ability were heaven-defying? He wasn't the only one. Oh no! We've lured the big guy from the depths of the giant Dragon Valley out. What should we do now? With the strength of the two of them, it was already so difficult to deal with a small dragon. If they were to encounter a big guy, they would not be able to withstand it. In the end, Gao Lin gritted his teeth and gave up the idea of catching this small dragon. The other person seemed to respect him as well. At this moment, he turned around and left, and the other person quickly followed. Ah Long was still a little angry and wanted to chase after them. 2 weak ants actually dared to have ideas about him. They were really tired of living. What kind of place was the giant Dragon Valley? Have they not heard of it? Well, don't chase after them. Come back. Those 2 people are not important people. If you chase after them now, they will have already run away. What's more, if you rush out so recklessly, what if you fall into their trap? Qin Yu had already packed his things and was ready to leave. Now he had gotten what he wanted. A very large bottle was filled to the brim. If he refined this essence, blood on the spot, it would at least allow him to break through to the Xian immortal realm. But now he needed an absolutely safe place. Obviously, the giant Dragon Valley was not quiet or safe enough. No matter from which aspect, this was not the most suitable place. He bid farewell to his clansmen. Ah Long followed Qin Yu. Master, are you going to use this cloud boat to travel? This is really too slow. Why don't you let me do it? I will definitely be able to reach the place immediately with Master. Qin Yu did not want to be so high profile. But now, the speed of Yinzhou was indeed a little slow. If they were to take the cloud boat all the way, it would be a troublesome matter whether they could transfer to all 3 places. If Ah Long could take them with him, at least the speed was not a problem. It was just that the environment was much worse than the cloud boat. There wasn't a warm room, nor was there a steaming hot meal. There was only an endless cold wind. However, this was nothing to them. It was just the wind. You will take care of the road, but when we reach the neighboring city, immediately change to the cloud boat. After all, this was a real dragon. No matter where it went, it was incomparably eye-catching. Qin Yu did not want to cause trouble at the moment. He just wanted to keep a low profile, because the next goal was the Dragon Temple. The 2 words dragon, god, reminded him of the Dark Dragon God. He did not know whether it had anything to do with the Dark Dragon God, but he had to go and confirm it anyway. Even though he has been traveling at such a high speed, he has only been able to refine a drop of blood essence on the way. His strength had increased a little, but he still could not reach a breakthrough. After all, he was sitting on the dragon's back. It really wasn't a comfortable environment. The time Qin you could spend to refine the blood essence was actually very little. To be able to achieve such a result was already considered good. This is the place. This seems to be the area where the Dragon Temple is located, but we have just reached the border. This is still the outermost area. Master, what you are looking for should be in the innermost area. Ah Long also wanted to see it with him, but the white dragon was too conspicuous. At present, Ah Long would not shrink his body and turn himself into the size of a small snake. With such a large piece there, who could not see it? At that time, not to mention whether they would attract other people's attention, it would not be so easy for them to enter the city. After changing places with Ah Long, Qin Yu sat on the cloud boat again. At this time, they were not far from there. At most, it would only be half a day. After half a day, they would be able to reach the place. Chapter 866. Qin Yu used this half a day to cultivate again. Soon, he refined a few drops of essence blood, and his strength increased again, breaking through from the middle stage to the late stage. At this time, there was still a small part left, but he was not in a hurry to refine this small part of the essence blood because they had already reached the place. The dragon soul jumped down first and observed the surrounding environment. No one would stop and look at them. Everyone had their own things to do. There was only one thing in common on all of them, and that was that there must be a small dragon shadow on their clothes. Some were embroidered, some were painted, and they all looked about the same. This is the main city under the control of the Dragon Temple. I heard that everyone here thinks that the dragon god is supreme in this world. Qin Yu was slightly stunned when he heard this, because it was really a little familiar. Perhaps it was a coincidence that they came today. Today was the day of the monthly hall meeting of the Dragon Temple. They followed the crowd and walked in. Qin Yu and the Dragon Soul were so unique that they did not fit in with the crowd, so they naturally attracted some attention. But it was just some people who took a few more glances at them. They did not seem to be very curious about why they came in. Looking around, everyone's clothes more or less had a dragon's shadow on them. Only the two of them did not have it, so they looked particularly conspicuous. Keep an eye on these two. Don't let them cause any trouble. If they don't do anything, don't bother. Almost everywhere, there was not even a place to stay. Some people took out a square cloth from the small bag they carried and spread it on the ground, and sat down directly. Looking at the statue in the middle that seemed to have changed a little, but was particularly similar in some places, Qin Yu could not help but laugh. It was really an acquaintance. It was just that he did not know how the dark dragon god became a light one. In the immortal world, they had become a moderately powerful force. But he was sure that the dark dragon god's original body was definitely not in the immortal world, but in the dark realm. The essence blood stored in the statue last time allowed him to break through in one fell swoop. If he guessed correctly, there should be a drop of the same essence blood in the middle of this statue. It was a pity that if he forced it in front of everyone, he would only become a target. It was accompanied by a loud bell. Everyone knelt down reverently. There were so many people present, but in the end, only 2 people did not kneel. Among the kneeling crowd, he was particularly conspicuous. Looks like we've been targeted. However, this is also very normal. Of course, the 2 of them did not believe in the so-called dragon god. He even completely disdained the so-called dragon god. This kind of thing could not be faked. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would be exposed. They were from other places. As long as someone investigated, they would find out. Soon, people began to whisper to each other. The order of the entire hall was no longer as strict as it had been at the beginning, because there were 2 people who did not kneel. This was in front of the dragon god. Those who dared to disrespect the dragon god before. None of them could see the sun of the next day. They were both nervous and terrified, afraid that they would be punished again, but they also wanted to know the background of these 2 people. Soon there was an uproar. A man with long white hair walked over. Since you're already here, you're a guest. You should abide by the rules of the Dragon God Temple. If the 2 of you want to stay, please follow everyone and don't break the rules. If you don't want to stay, you can also leave the Dragon God Temple at any time. We won't force you. Qin Yu glanced at him. His expression was unfathomable. Everyone, but there are more than just people here. Let me guess, are you human? After the last word fell, the man with long white hair's pupils shrank. He had always hidden very well. How could his identity be discovered so easily? There were so many people around the Dragon God Temple, but none of them discovered his identity. Usually, he also went out on behalf of the Dragon God Temple. He had dealt with many so-called powerhouses, but they had never doubted his identity. This white-haired man seemed to have a compassionate look, but there was an unusual aura on him. Qin Yu was not completely sure whether he was human or not. If he saw the look on his face, he already knew in his heart that this was really not a human. This Dragon God Temple, it's really interesting. Qin Yu took a deep look at him, then walked out of the door with a smile. I'll come back another day. I still have some things to do now. The white-haired man's face was gloomy and stiff. The meeting was still going on as usual, but this time his mind was floating and not as pious as before. There was nothing interesting here. It was just another branch of the Black Dragon God. It was about the same as the Abyss City. It was just that this was on the surface, more or less. It had to be done openly. Moreover, the Dragon God Temple had always been relatively low-key. It was not too ostentatious. It was only famous within a limited range. It could be said that it had influence, but it did not have a strong sense of existence. In order to do this, the dark dragon god must have spent a lot of effort. But now he was going to the next location. It was also the place he really wanted to go. The 1,000-deep demonic forest. Just by getting closer, he could see the thick black mist that seemed to be about to materialize. This black room looked unusual. It seemed to have its own spirituality and could change into several forms in the air. A nimble and sly-looking deer hopped over. It looked left and right. Suddenly it found the black mist. It turned around and wanted to run, but it was too late. The black mist turned into a huge palm and caught the deer. In almost the blink of an eye, Little Path, who was originally very nimble and had smooth fur, turned into a dried corpse and finally turned into sand that drifted in the wind. It became a small part of the countless yellow sand on the ground. There was a lot of yellow sand like this in the sky. If a gust of wind blew over, the yellow sand would soon drift and scatter everywhere. Waves of dust rose. This black mist was similar to the one he had encountered before, but it was different because there were some trees in the area shrouded by the black mist. He did not know if there were other living things inside, but those trees were all alive and well. No wonder it's called the 1,000 Caves Demonic Forest. I don't know how many lives are buried here. It actually took the initiative to hunt. Anyone could see that this black mist was a little unusual. Of course, it was not easy to get close to it, but as long as you got a little closer, the black mist would instantly capture the prey it had set its eyes on. Every move was extremely overbearing. Wherever it passed, there would be no life left. Of course, the forest was an accident. Chapter 867. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Stepping into the black fog was like stepping into another world. Qin Yu's strength had increased once again. He could now freely control his strength. The black fog had completely enveloped the two of them, but it was not enough to devour them. Wisps of black fog disappeared into nothingness. However, there was an endless amount of black fog in this forest. The ground was covered in yellow sand, which meant that there were corpses everywhere. It seems that this place is indeed very dangerous. However, there were no traces of dragons anywhere. However, after reaching the giant Dragon Valley and striking a deal with the dragon tribe, he felt that this trip had not been in vain. It would not be a pity if he did not gain much from this trip. The most mysterious thing about the 1,000-deep demonic forest was not the black fog, but some bizarre events. Even if one was extremely powerful after entering the black fog, they would at least become crazy when they came out. Many people had tried to enter the black fog, and, of course, there were also people who knew how to restrain it, but no one had ever come out unscathed. They were either missing or talking nonsense in a deranged manner. Some even had their minds destroyed. The situation was extremely grim. Gradually, this place became a taboo place that everyone would avoid when talking about it. There was not a single leaf on the ground. It was unknown what kind of trees grew around this place. They looked ordinary, but when one got closer, one would find that they were actually very lush. At first glance, they looked pretty good, but when one thought about how these trees were planted with countless corpses, one could not help but shudder. The demonic forest was slightly cold, and it seemed that there was always a cool breeze coming from all directions. Russell, a long and slender black branch, had completely merged with the black fog. Chirp! With a casual wave of his sword, Qin Yu chopped that long and slender black branch into two. The slender black branch fell to the ground and kept wriggling. It was like a snake that had been cut in half, but soon after it gradually withered. It became a small section of a withered branch. Russell, black vines that blotted out the sky and covered the earth were spreading in their direction. One-Eyed immediately activated his innate ability. However, he turned pale with fright after taking a look. We have been completely surrounded. These branches are everywhere. They have already tightly surrounded us. We can't walk on the trees either. There are also many black branches on the trees. Although the branches on the tree haven't moved, the number of them is astonishing. In other words, climbing a tree was not the best choice. In this lush forest, it was really difficult to fly into the sky, because the branches of the trees were too wide. There was simply no way for them to easily pass through. He could either stay behind and fight to the death with the black branches on the ground, or climb up the tree and face the countless branches that could immediately come to life. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Let's try using fire first. A small cluster of golden-red flames appeared between Chinyu. As soon as the flame appeared, it danced happily, and the surrounding black fog faded a lot because of the sudden appearance of the flame. This was a wisp of divine fire that he had left behind. Now it could be put to good use. It was active and silently burning the black branches. The moment Walk Life appeared, these branches wanted to run away immediately. However, the fire was so strong that they had nowhere to run. The surrounding trees, as well as the dormant black branches on the trees, became the best fuel. In just a short period of time, Chinyu's surroundings were already empty. He had left a large area, and the sun shone on his body. Only ashes and large pits were left in the places where the fire had burned. From the shape of the pits, it looked more like the roots of the trees. Sure enough, this place was not that simple. The black fog was only the most superficial danger. It was actually very easy to restrain Black 5. There were many things that could restrain the black fog and prevent it from getting close. But in this place, these seemingly harmless trees were very dangerous. Looking at the large pits on the ground, it was easy to guess. The roots of these trees were all connected together, and after growing for countless years, they had become even larger. Anyone who came here would definitely be attacked. Just think about it. There were endless enemies and countless black fog blocking one's line of sight, making it impossible to tell the direction. It was normal for so many people to die here. However, Chinyu's intuition told him that this was not the true secret of the 1,000 deep demonic forest. There was no lack of powerful experts among the people who had come to explore this place. The fact that these people could survive here showed that their strength was not bad. But these people were still crazy, as if they had been greatly stimulated. The divine fire was just enough to restrain these cold trees, but it did not take long for it to burn almost completely. Chinyu withdrew the flames that were still wreaking havoc everywhere. The sea of fire instantly turned into a small flame at his fingertip. It then disappeared into Chinyu's palm. At this time, there were only a few trees left. The black fog had also been greatly damaged, and it had become much thinner. If someone were to stand outside and look in, they would definitely be able to see everything. Although some places in the distance still looked blurry, it was no longer as dark as before. It was as if it was the mouth of some kind of giant beast. Once one entered, they would never be able to return. Chinyu walked deeper into the forest. There was no fire dance, and the surroundings were quiet. The environment was indeed very bad, and there was not even a sound. Except for the sound of his own footsteps, there was no other sound. It was as if he was the only one left in this world. What kind of trash dares to appear in front of me? The one-eyed man suddenly yelled. The faintly discernible feeling disappeared in an instant. Although the surroundings were quiet, he was not the only one left. That was just a momentary illusion. The real danger had just appeared when the one-eyed man discovered it. The one-eyed man's angry shout broke the fearful environment that he had painstakingly created. You had felt that something was wrong. He had never felt fear before. He was about to beat the other party at his own game to see what the real danger was going to do to him. The one-eyed man had messed up everything the other party had done. This time, he wasn't as lazy as before, but he did not use his strength in the right place. Instead, it was by a stroke of luck that he had helped the other party. Otherwise, you would have beaten the other party at his own game and been able to find out the other party's background. But now he was still in the dark. He did not know who the other party was. He also did not know what abilities the other party had. A great opportunity had passed by, but who knew if this was another kind of opportunity? Chapter 868. It was pitch black everywhere and there was no sound at all. Only their footsteps could be heard. It looked more like they were shouting at the air. Even though they easily broke through the situation, the existence behind the scenes still didn't show himself. Because they easily broke through the situation, they even became more cautious. Unknowingly, the surrounding black fog seemed to have become thicker. Humph. Hiding the head and showing the tail, why don't you come out and talk? Wisps of flames appeared in Qin Yu's hand again. Now that they couldn't see anyone anywhere, they would release a fire and burn him clean. The scorching flames spread to the surroundings, and from time to time, there would be crackling sounds of burning. The existence hidden in the dark couldn't sit still in the end, because this flame was born with an extremely strong restraining ability. In addition, if it wasn't controlled, the speed at which the flame spread would be absolutely astonishing. There was a slight fluctuation in the air, almost undetectable. The dragon's soul immediately sensed it and changed the space-time there. It also allowed them to clearly see what was hidden in the black fog. It was something that looked a little ugly. A monster with a human head and a dragon's body. And its tail was half of the pitch-black informant's body. The dragon bloodline came from the evil dragon. Qin Yu even felt a familiar aura from its body. It really is related to the black dragon god, but it was actually able to infiltrate into the primordial realm without attracting any attention. It can be considered a little capable. However, he only had a little bit of skill, that's all. The entire immortal realm had nothing to do with him. If they really wanted to talk about it, it could only be said that they were really fated. Seeing Qin Yu say the name of the black dragon god, the human-headed dragon monster was incomparably shocked. But for a moment, it was difficult to figure out his identity. Since you know my name, why don't you quickly retreat? The black dragon god isn't someone you can casually provoke. If you don't leave, then I can only shut your mouth forever. He had always thought that only the dead were more reliable. Qin, you seem to know a lot about the black dragon god. But their plan had reached the most critical point, and no one was allowed to destroy it. The invasion of the immortal realm began 1,000 years ago. After 1,000 years of operation, it was not easy to control a few places and secretly recruit countless people. If all their previous efforts were to go to waste because of a small accident at this time, none of them could bear the wrath of Lord Dragon God. The surrounding black fog accompanied the appearance of the Dragonians. It had become even more intense. There were even wisps of black water flowing out of it. It was obvious that the mist had turned solid. Moreover, these wandering streams of water were constantly changing their shapes, as if they had a life of their own. He shuttled back and forth in the black fog, looking for the best opportunity to strike. Heaven-suppressing war god formation. The huge array spread out in all directions, covering almost half of the 1,000-deep demonic forest. The Dragonborn also felt that something was amiss, but when he looked at the town, he laughed disdainfully. It is indeed a little tricky, but is this your trump card? It's just a formation. Someone once told me that as long as we are strong enough, no formation can control us. The Dragonians charged up and prepared to destroy the huge formation in the sky. He was already an immortal soul. In addition, he had the advantage of the surrounding terrain. It was not difficult for him to destroy this town. It was just that he had to pay a price for it. Qin Yu focused on controlling the formation, with the dragon's soul assisting him. Soon after, the Dragonborn was battered and exhausted, but there was an excited smile on his face. Because he was close to the core of the formation. He could even see the seemingly endless amount of soul power stored within the formation. He was one of the dragon god's protectors, so he naturally knew what had happened a few days ago. And coincidentally, he had been there once before. So he knew that there was actually a lot of soul power there, but he was too lazy to collect it. Firstly, it was too troublesome to collect it, and secondly, he rarely had the chance to use it. Those souls were too irritable and naturally repelled him. It was too troublesome to use them, so he had always placed it there as a natural barrier. It was also to prevent people from finding the underground Abyss City. But after the incident that made Lord Dragon God extremely angry happened, the almost endless sea of soul power next to the Abyss City had completely disappeared, not leaving a single drop behind. Even if it was just a soul and a spirit, it did not leave them. I know who you are. I didn't expect you to improve your strength so quickly in such a short period of time. Qin Yu raised his strength to the peak of the celestial immortal realm in a short period of time. He only needed an opportunity to break through. That was why he had been coming here, looking for that last opportunity to break through. The Dragonborn had never seen such a monstrous genius before. It had only been a month since that incident. Someone could improve his strength so quickly. In time, he would become a big problem for the Dragon God. If someone dug up the old scores at this time and said that he deliberately let people out, then he would definitely not get any benefits. So whether it was for his own benefit or for the Dragon God above him, he had to kill them no matter the cost. He had to keep them here, to become part of the endless yellow soil on the ground. The Dragonborn not only thought of this in his heart, but even said it out arrogantly. That depends on whether you have the strength or not. Qin Yu looked very indifferent, as if he was not in a hurry. Even the dragon soul, who had been playing tricks on him from time to time, did not care too much. The Dragonborn was in a sorry state, but at this time he was already close to the core of the formation. Aren't you relying on this formation? But it can't be your trump card. It will be destroyed by me soon. The Dragonborn, who was in a state of excitement, did not notice the indifference in Qin Yu's eyes. He was completely calm, even as he watched him gradually approach the core of the formation. It did not cause the slightest ripple in his heart. You're right. This grand formation can't be my trump card. And this formation was never a trump card. It was just to see if there were other things hidden in the dark. Now that it was confirmed, there was only one monster guarding the 1,000 deep demonic forest. There was no one else. There was nothing else. He could make his move. The Dragonborn only saw a blur in front of him. A dark light flashed. Dragon Slaying Chant. Chapter 869. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Dragon Slaying Chant. The dark light swept across the dragonoid's neck. Blood splattered. The dragonoid, who was in a state of excitement, could not resist at all. Fortunately, at the last moment, some small scales appeared on his neck, blocking most of the attack. But after retreating from the core of the formation, the dragonoid immediately took out a black ball and stuffed it into his mouth. Qin Yu looked at the black ball. It seemed to be the solidified body of the black fog, specially made to look like a black ball, because the black ball was still twisting and turning, as if it was alive, but it could not break free and escape. Wisps of black gas appeared on the dragonoid's face, but soon the wisps of black gas disappeared from his face. The blood on his neck had stopped, but he was still in a bad state. That's interesting. He originally thought that the black fog was just a tool. He did not expect it to have a medicinal effect. The dragonoid's mood could not be as relaxed as before. Not only could he not relax, but he also had to be vigilant at all times. The thing he ate just now could indeed control his injuries, but it also had a special effect. That was to temporarily increase his strength. Most of it increased his recovery ability. He did not want to die here. Let's see what kind of method you will use to ambush me this time. At this time, he could only end the battle quickly. Otherwise, when the effect of the medicine was over, he could only immediately hide and recuperate. Otherwise, he would die without a doubt. If he was unlucky, even if he killed someone at the last moment, if he met someone else who came in, then he would die too sullenly. What he used just now was only the first move of the dragon slaying chant. Alarm! The move and the name had a lot in common. It was indeed only to achieve the purpose of alarm. If the strength was too weak, or even weaker than the user, then naturally it would be a one-hit kill. Then let's try the second move. Hibernating move. Qin Yu suddenly disappeared. Even if the dragonoid used all his attention to the surroundings, he could not find where he was. Suddenly, a dark light flashed in front of him. The dragonoid retreated in panic, but at the same time, a dark light flashed behind him. Suddenly, the dark light that covered the sky and earth attacked one after another. Each time, it would leave a wound on his body. The most important part of this move was the movement. He wandered in the void. As long as I'm fast enough, you'll only see a shadow and won't be able to discover where I am. Even while maintaining an extremely high speed, he also concealed himself and launched an attack. Countless people had suffered setbacks in the first move. It would take at least a year and a half to master shock awareness, not to mention the rest. Although the sentence was simple and not difficult to understand, no one knew how to do it. If he couldn't reach such a high speed, he wouldn't have been able to use this move. It only took Qin Yu 3 days to learn all of these. He casually flipped through them on the road. Wounds of various sizes had already appeared on the Dragonians' bodies. He had reached the end of his patience. He roared angrily. Its tail kept swinging in all directions, but it could only hit the air. Furious roar. It was clearly 2 incomparably plain words. However, the Dragonians could hear the suffocation in his voice. Later on, he felt a sharp sword in his heart. Only then did he realize that he wasn't hallucinating, nor was it those 2 words that gave him a suffocating pressure. Instead, it was because he was truly on the verge of death. Qin Yu unsheathed his sword. The corpse of the Dragonians was already cold when it fell to the ground. The loud roar before his death seemed to be reverberating in the air. It really fit the name of Furious Roar. After the main culprit died, the black mist kept dispersing. Even if it tried its best to condense again, it would not be long before it completely dissipated in the air. There were still many places in the depths of the 1,000-deep demonic forest. Qin Yu glanced over there and coldly retracted his hand, preparing to return home. The only Dragonians here were already dead. Even if he continued to explore, it would be meaningless for him. Moreover, he had summarized some of his experiences in this battle. Now that he was back on the Cloud ship, he could make a breakthrough. At this moment, in the Cloud Immortal City, there was an unprecedented change. The city lord was under someone's control. Originally, those people were just a group of profound immortals. It wasn't like he didn't have the ability to resist, but unknowingly he was drugged. After he was caught, he was still thinking about what went wrong for him to be drugged, but he couldn't think of anything. The only thing worth suspecting was the packet of snacks that Lan Feng gave him, but he was very clear about the only child he was holding. Even if she was usually spoiled, her thoughts were extremely pure. It was impossible for her to have such thoughts of killing and to use such a sinister method. Soon, Lan Feng was also thrown in. When he was thrown in, he was already heavily injured. His dazzling red hair was also messed up. Because of the guess in his heart, the city lord was inevitably disappointed in this son of his. He might not have such thoughts himself, but it was very likely that he was being used by others. The first person he suspected was Chi Chuan, who had been purposely getting close to Lan Feng. "Don't worry, I'm fine." But those people were too ruthless. I've already made an agreement with Chi Chuan. Originally, we were going to go out together today, but I stood him up during the day, so he said at night. If he finds out that I didn't go, he will definitely know what happened. He will help us. Even at this point, Lan Feng still treated this friend with sincerity, and he firmly believed that this friend would come to save him. But the city lord was not so naive. There must be a mastermind behind this, and he had reason to suspect that the mastermind was Chi Chuan, who had always been remembered by Lan Feng. However, there was no point in bringing this up now. Soon, he matured and could not think so much, because he was also beaten black and blue. The city lord's residence changed owners overnight. In Cloud Immortal City, everyone was in danger. None of them dared to mention this matter, afraid that they would be implicated. A small and inconspicuous cloud boat slowly returned to Cloud Immortal City and landed. Qin Yu waved his hand and kept the huge cloud boat in his hand. Once he entered the city, he felt that something was amiss, because the inspection was too strict. After he showed the city lord's token in his hand, everyone was looking at him strangely. It was as if they were sizing him up strangely, with countless gloating expressions. It seems that something did happen without my knowledge, but he had only been gone for 2 months. Even the agreed 3 months had not arrived yet. Such a big thing had happened in the city, and he did not know about it. Chapter 870. The huge whip with barbs hit the city lord's body and took away a few pieces of bloody flesh. There was not a single part of the city lord's body that was unharmed. However, he still opened his eyes weakly. Come over here. I can also consider telling you something. Chi Chuan's face turned green and white. He couldn't walk at all. Both of his legs had been crippled. Therefore, even though the city lord knew that he could not walk, he still purposely said those words. You old man, since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being ruthless. Originally, I was willing to give you some preferential treatment because of Xiao Feng. Since you don't know what's good for you, then I have to treat you well. You don't want to talk? Then I'll force you to talk. Treat him well for me. The huge iron plate was roasted into a scorching red color. It was the size of a bed and was more than enough to put a person on it. The surrounding people could not help but be shocked. If they put a person on it, they would be cooked in a short time. Even though they were already used to using all kinds of torture methods to interrogate people. However, such a method was a little too cruel. This caused them to shudder in fear. If this goes on, he will die. Chi Chuan had already decided to use this method to force the city lord to talk. In other words, even if he died, he had ways to force him to talk. At most, he would be a little more careful and give him good medicine before he died. So what if he was heavily injured? As long as he did not talk, he would not die. Looking at the huge iron plate, the city lord's eyes were filled with fear. If he was put on it, he would not be able to live nor die. Don't be anxious. Take it slow. Put his legs on it first and roast them bit by bit. It's best if they are completely roasted. If he still doesn't talk, then take it slow. I want to see if it's better to be a stick or to talk. The sound of applause came from behind him. Chi Chuan's legs were already crippled. It was difficult for him to turn around. Some people saw Qin Yu, but they didn't recognize him. Only the city lord's eyes suddenly emitted a huge light. That was the light of hope. When he had heard Chi Chuan's words earlier, he had even thought about it. It didn't seem like a big deal if word got out. As long as there was life, there was hope. He still had a son. If this one was useless, he could just nurture another one. Moreover, Lan Feng was never a fool. As long as he could be taught a lesson, he would be a very intelligent and talented seedling. In short, as long as he could escape from this damned place, he would have endless hope. There would still be hope in the future. Soon, his eyes dimmed again, turning into dead ash. Qin Yu was indeed capable of fighting against a Xian immortal. However, many of those people were Xian immortals. Together, they could even rival a half-step immortal soul. Chi Chuan turned his head with great difficulty and saw a face that was neither familiar nor unfamiliar. Lan Feng would occasionally mention him, and he had some impression of this person, because this person had something to do with his crippled legs. If Qin Yu had said it back then, he might not have ended up like this. Resentment and excitement immediately appeared in his voice. Take him down for me. There's someone who can let this old man see the power of fire dance. Fire dance was the name of this new torture tool. He had created it himself. He was also very curious about its power. The materials were carefully selected by him. It was even enough to be used to forge iron. However, it wasn't to the extent of killing people in an instant. It was guaranteed to be able to make people suffer. A group of people crowded around him. When the city lord saw this, the despair on his face deepened. "Hurry up and run. This is our business. It has nothing to do with you. If you take the chance to run now, you will only attract more people." There was one more thing he didn't say. If more people were attracted, it would be even more difficult for Chinyu to leave this place safely. Looking at the people who surrounded him, most of them were early Xian immortals. Only a small number of them were mid-Xian immortals. Of course, this was only a portion of the guards here. There should be some stronger guards outside. Chinyu glanced at the city lord who was beaten miserably. "I can't just leave. After all, there's still a contract between us. If you die, wouldn't I not be able to complete the contract? I will be punished then." After hearing this, the city lord was slightly stunned. For a moment, he couldn't tell if Chinyu really didn't know or if he was pretending. If the other person in the contract died, then the contract would automatically become void. Of course, since two people had already made a contract, they couldn't attack each other. However, if some people didn't want to complete the contract, they could let others kill the other person in the contract. This was the best way to break the contract. Therefore, Chinyu's words were impossible. Looking at the tall figure, the city lord suddenly saw hope. Since the situation couldn't get worse, he might as well take a gamble. If he won the gamble, the crisis in front of him would become a bubble. Even if he lost the gamble, the worst that could happen was death. Could it be worse than the torture he suffered before? That would be worse than death. "Fight!" The city lord forcefully broke free from the guards beside him. After all, with his realm, even if he was drugged, he still had the ability to resist. However, he knew very well that with his strength alone, no matter how much he resisted, he wouldn't be able to escape. He still had the lives of his family. So even if he gradually recovered some strength, he didn't think of escaping directly. How could he care about that now? "Chin, you didn't wait for the city lord to move. Sting swim. Drinking dragon sword." Perhaps it was because he had seen dragon blood not long ago. The drinking dragon sword became even brighter, and every move was shining with treasure light. However, everyone could only watch as the light flashed everywhere. Once it appeared, one person would fall. In the blink of an eye, everyone fell to the ground, except for Chinyu's dragon soul and the city lord. At this moment, the city lord had just broken free from the restraints of those people. Looking at the corpses all over the ground, the shock in his heart was indescribable. How much time had passed? For the immortal world, it was just a snap of the fingers. Chinyu's strength had already reached such a realm? Thinking of what he had just heard, the city lord suddenly showed a look of horror. "You have already comprehended the dragon's slaying chant." Chapter 871. And it didn't look like he was just comprehending it, but he had already learned the second move. But to do this, he had to learn the first move to the extreme. But in such a short time, the city lord didn't dare to believe that someone could do this. He gave it out as a gift, but the most important thing was still that sword. He didn't expect that this thing had been passed down for generations in their hands, but it hadn't been used. Now that it was in Chinyu's hands, it had become so powerful in just 2 months. In the blink of an eye, he had killed so many Xian immortals. So what if there were many people outside? The city lord's heart had already settled down. At least he wasn't completely without hope now. As long as Chinyu was around, he would believe in miracles. Now isn't the time to reminisce. Let's leave first. Chinyu brought the dragon soul and walked out slowly. Because of his important identity, the house owner was locked up in the depths, and the others were also locked up not far away. Among these people, there were some familiar faces and some unfamiliar faces. Chinyu released all of them in one breath. The dragon soul changed the flow of the entire space in one breath. These people could use the slowest and most leisurely speed to walk out slowly. And when the people outside arrived, they had already disappeared without a trace. Regardless of whether it was for setting up in advance or for letting these powerless people take the first step, it was extremely useful. At the start, he didn't notice that the time here was different from the time outside. Only the stronger Shiana mortals would be able to sense some unusual waves of energy, but the will to live had already taken over their minds, so they didn't think so much in a short time. All of them hurriedly ran out in a fluster. Lan Feng's face was covered in dust, but he didn't suffer much damage. He just looked a little pathetic, especially when facing Qinyu. He didn't dare to look at him directly. Although he was a little willful previously, he wasn't so ignorant of the situation. Qin Yu didn't care about the past and saved him. Even if he couldn't bring himself to thank Qin Yu, he had to keep a low profile. When the city lord saw this, he couldn't help but sigh. How nice would it be if she could always be so obedient? It was just a pity that Lan Feng seemed to be born with a tendency to not know her place. Since young, she had been spoiled by him to have a spoiled temperament, thinking that she could do whatever she wanted just because she was talented. They couldn't even tell who was good and who was bad, which led to their family suffering so much. Although there was no evidence, the city lord was certain that Lan Feng was involved in this matter. Everyone came out one after another, spontaneously opening the other prison doors. A large portion of them were the guards of the city lord's mansion. Most of the people who were rescued were weak. Even if his strength and realm were there, it seemed that he could not use much of it. These people have already been drugged. I'm afraid that within a short period of time, the city lord was a bit worried. If everyone regained their former battle prowess, the city lord would not be able to do anything about it. With the addition of Qin Yu, he was confident that he could take back the entire city lord's mansion. But now, everyone was in such a weak state. How could he save so many people with his strength alone? Moreover, having too many people would be a burden, but it was impossible for him to give up on anyone. Qin Yu looked at the situation of all of them. Actually, this matter was not complicated. It was just a kind of drug that could temporarily paralyze people and make them unable to use their strength. One-Eyed suddenly hopped out of the room. Me. I can let them regain their previous strength. Qin Yu looked at One-Eyed's small body. As far as he knew, One-Eyed did not know how to make drugs. He did not know how to detoxify. What he was best at was only seeing through falsehoods and creating illusions. One-Eyed was a little nervous, because he was not sure if his method would work. This drug could only make them feel weak and powerless, but he could create a real illusion for them, as long as they felt very strong all over. Then, they would naturally be able to use enough strength. They would not be affected by the drug at all. At most, they would suffer some side effects because of it. After leaving the illusion, they would feel very, very tired. But this was inevitable. Although they had fallen into an illusion, every bit of strength they had used was real. So more or less, after leaving the illusion, without that almost inexhaustible strength, of course they would feel a little weak. Compared to what they had gained, this bit of sacrifice was nothing. Then, let's do it this way. Don't worry, just kill them directly. A group of people who were originally going to be a burden became part of their help. This also had a good effect on Qin Yu. These people would no longer be a burden to him, and they could even play a small role on the side. With the two offset, it would save him a lot of effort. One-Eyed, of course, could not kill them. After all, he could only create illusions. The killing intent he could create in the illusions was probably to drive people crazy. Sometimes One-Eyed felt that his existence was very unnecessary. So once he grabbed an opportunity to show off, he would not leave himself any leeway. Under the shocked gaze of the city, Lord and Lan Feng, those guards stood up again one by one, no longer needing to support each other to walk together. They just felt that their bodies were full of strength. It was as if they were not in a weak state after being drugged, but in their strongest state. Qin Yu looked at these people who were full of vigor and fell into deep thought. What if you make them think that they have a breakthrough in their strength? Can we help them unleash even more power? One-Eyed had never thought of this, because everyone knew how big the difference in the realm was. But looking at these people who were full of vigor, he still gritted his teeth and decided to give it a try. And the subject of this experiment was the city lord. He was willing to do it. But looking at the injuries on his body, One-Eyed shook his head. If you do this again, you might die directly. So he was still not qualified. Lan Feng suddenly stood up. Let me do it. In the end, he just let him do it. After all, he was the one with the lightest injuries. And he was also very young, strong, and talented. Even if it was an experiment, it would at most cause him some minor injuries. Lan Feng swallowed his saliva, feeling nervous. But soon, that nervousness was replaced by excitement. It was as if endless strength was spreading in his body.